I will never forget the smell of Mercer County General Hospital. It was a persistent mixture of cheap disinfectant, stale cafeteria food, and that sour, sweet note of human illness that gets into your clothes and stays there, no matter how much you wash your scrubs. For an intern like me, Gary, fresh out of college with more books than real experience, Mercer was the end of the world. A faded red brick building, lost in the hills of West Virginia, where dreams of saving lives collided with the harsh reality of bureaucracy and scarcity. I arrived in January, with dirty snow piled at the edges of the roads like a bad omen. My first night shift was only the beginning of a litany of exhaustion, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the night of April 17th. The night when the fragile veneer of normality was torn away and revealed an abyss from which, although I escaped, I will never fully recover. It was a Friday. The internal medicine ward, my kingdom that night, was unusually quiet. Only 5 patients, all stable, their monitors emitting the soft, rhythmic beeps that were the soundtrack to my vigil. At about 11:45 p.m., the head nurse on duty, Eleanor Vance, approached the nursing station. Nurse Vance was an institution unto herself. A woman in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back into a bun so severe and perfect, it looked as if it had been carved from marble. Her movements were precise, economical, and her eyes, the color of a leaden sky, saw everything. We interns had a reverential fear of her. She wasn't cruel, at least not openly, but her coldness was so absolute that it was intimidating. "Dr. Mercer," she said, my last name sounding like a sentence when she said it. "I need your help with a transfer. A confidential patient." The word confidential at Mercer could mean anything from a mayor with an STD to an inmate in custody. I nodded, too tired to question. Exhaustion clouds instinct. "Sure, Nurse Vance. Which room?" "He's not in a room," she replied, and her tone, always flat, took on a metallic quality that should have alerted me. "He's in the storage room in the East Wing, the one under renovation. It's a discreet transfer." To the basement. The East Wing had been closed for renovations for over a year. We all knew it was a white lie to justify staff cuts. The basement was the realm of the forgotten, dusty files, obsolete equipment, and, most sinister, the hospital morgue. A cold sweat ran down my back. None of this was protocol. "The basement?" I asked, unable to hide my discomfort. "Shouldn't it be in the ICU or at least on a secure ward?" "Your orders are confidential, doctor," she cut in, her gaze an impenetrable wall. "Are you coming with me, or should I report your lack of cooperation to the chief resident?" The threat was clear. A complaint from Nurse Vance could mean a permanent stain on my record, the end of a career that was just beginning. Apathy and fear, those constant companions of the intern, took over. I nodded again, feeling a knot form in my stomach. We walked silently through the deserted hallways. Our footsteps echoed in the dimly lit corridor leading to the East Wing. She was carrying a duffel bag she hadn't had before. The air grew colder, more dusty, and smelled of dampness from the peeling walls. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting dancing, sickly shadows. We reached a door marked Storage 3B. Eleanor took out a keychain full of old, rusty keys, not the standard magnetic access cards, and opened the lock with a sharp click that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. The room was dark, but the smell that came out of it hit me with physical force. It was a nauseating mixture of cheap antiseptic, stale sweat, urine, and, underlying it all, a metallic putrid sweetness that could only be blood and pus. Eleanor turned on the light. It wasn't a storage room. It was a makeshift torture chamber. In the center, under the harsh, flickering light, was a rusty hospital bed with thick leather straps on the armrests and ankles. On it lay a figure that barely looked human. A man, emaciated to the extreme, with sallow skin stretched tight over his bones. He was naked, except for a piece of dirty sheet that partially covered his waist. His head was shaved, and his scalp, arms, and torso were a map of horrors. Dozens of precise linear scars, bruises in various shades of purple and yellow, and most terrifying of all, recent incisions, sutured with eerie clinical skill. Some of these wounds were visibly infected, oozing a yellowish fluid that stained the gauze. An IV catheter protruded from his arm, connected to a bag of saline solution hanging from a hook on the wall. A nasogastric tube emerged from one nostril, but it was his gaze that froze my blood to the bone. His eyes were open, glazed over from a combination of drugs and utter terror. But deep within them, there was still a glimmer of consciousness, an understanding of his own nightmare that pierced me like a spear. Those eyes begged, cursed, clung to a life that had been reduced to this. "My God," I gasped, backing up until I hit the closed door. What is this?" "The confidential patient, doctor," said Eleanor's voice, calm and impassive behind me. "John Doe, vegetative state. He has been in our care for several months. He requires specialized palliative care." "This isn't palliative care," I shouted, my voice breaking into a high-pitched tone of panic. "This is torture. This is kidnapping. Look at those wounds. He's conscious." Eleanor didn't flinch. She placed the duffel bag on a side table filled with medical instruments. Scalpels of various sizes, needles, suture threads, bottles of clear, unlabeled liquids. "The diagnosis is complex. He exhibits episodes of severe self-mutilation. The procedures are necessary to maintain his stability and prevent further damage. Now help me move him to the basement. The room is ready." "No," I roared, adrenaline pumping through my exhaustion. "I'm calling the police. This is monstrous." I turned to open the door, but Eleanor moved with cat-like speed. She didn't physically stop me, she simply stood between me and the exit. Her gaze was not one of anger, but of cold, condescending pity, as if I were a child who didn't understand the rules of a deadly game. "And what will you tell them, Dr. Mercer?" she asked, her voice a sharp whisper that pierced my ears. "That head nurse Vance, with 32 years of impeccable service and numerous commendations, has a man kidnapped. Who will believe an intern assigned to this dump as a last resort, with your history of, let's say, indecision under pressure?" He paused, letting the implication of his knowledge of my past weaknesses sink in. "Besides, John Doe doesn't exist. There are no admission records, no medical history. If you call the police, all they'll find is you, in a restricted area next to a dying man with injuries you can't explain. Your fingerprints are here now. Mine, as you can see," she said, showing me her hands encased in latex gloves, "are not." The reality of the situation came crashing down on me with the weight of a building. She was right. I was trapped. I had walked there willingly. There were no witnesses. My word, that of a troubled intern, against that of a cornerstone of the hospital. It was my fault, my desperation, against her unshakable authority. "Why?" I whispered, my knees buckling. "Why are you doing this?" Eleanor flashed a cold smile, the first genuine expression I had seen on her face, and it made her even more terrifying. "Practice, Dr. Mercer, pure and simple practice. In a place like Mercer, with limited resources and real patients whose lives are hanging in the balance, one cannot afford to experiment, to make mistakes. John Doe," she said, nodding toward him as if he were a mannequin, "has allowed me to refine my techniques. Emergency intubations, central line placements, abscess drainages, even some minor dissections to better understand the anatomy in trauma cases. He is an invaluable educational resource, and very, very dedicated. His coldness was more terrifying than any outburst of madness. It was moral corruption elevated to the status of philosophy. He spoke of that human being, that person who suffered and felt, as if he were a practice corpse, but one that breathed, that experienced every cut, every prick, every moment of agony. "Now," he said, pulling a syringe preloaded with a clear liquid from the bag, "you have a choice. Help me move him quietly, and tonight will be just a bad dream that you can move on from. or you can become an administrative complication that will need to be resolved. I looked at the syringe. I looked into his steely eyes. I looked into John Doe's eyes, which at that moment seemed to focus on me with heartbreaking intensity, as if his last hope for humanity rested on my next action. The survival instinct, that primitive, cowardly animal that dwells deep within us, took hold of me. The prospect of my career ending before it began, of being accused of something so horrible, of facing the institutional machinery, it was too much. I nodded mechanically. My principles, the Hippocratic Oath, everything shattered in that moment of pure selfish fear. Between the two of us, we unfastened the straps. John Doe's body was light, almost like a child's, and cold to the touch. A guttural moan, a sound that came from the depths of his broken being, escaped his lips as we moved him. It was the sound of a soul being crushed. I almost collapsed right there. We carried him onto a transport stretcher that Eleanor had waiting in the hallway. We rode the service elevator down to the basement, an eternity of a ride filled with nothing but the hum of the motor, the creaking of the wheels, and the ragged gasps of my own breath. The prep room in the basement was another cell, larger, adjacent to the cold steel door of the morgue. It was equipped with an outdated vital signs monitor, more surgical instruments, and a small medical refrigerator. It was a nightmare operating room, a place where medicine had been perverted into its antithesis. I helped transfer John Doe to the new stretcher. As I held him down, his eyes met mine. For a fleeting moment, the fog of drugs seemed to lift. There was a flash of lucidity, of horrible, complete understanding. He knew that I knew, and he knew that I was abandoning him to his fate. "Good work, Doctor," said Eleanor, unhooking the IV bag and connecting it to a new stand. "You can return to your duties on the floor. We'll consider this incident never happened." I staggered out of the basement like a drunk. I climbed the service stairs and locked myself in the staff bathroom, where I vomited until there was nothing left in my stomach but bitter bile and the taste of fear. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was ashen, my eyes bloodshot, and filled with a horror I knew would never go away. I was no longer a doctor. I was an accomplice, a coward. The next few hours were a blur of automatons. I made my rounds, checked charts, signed orders. My hands shook uncontrollably every time I approached a patient. Every shadow in the hallway made me jump. Every distant sound seemed like John Doe's moan. Nurse Vance passed by the nursing station a couple of times, her expression as calm and professional as ever. For her, it was just another night on the job. For me, it was an eternity in hell. At 4 a.m., the guilt became unbearable. It was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't live with myself knowing what I knew, having done what I had done. The fear of professional consequences paled in comparison to the horror of what I was allowing. I made a decision. I was going to leave. I was going to drive to the nearest police station, even if it was 50 miles away, and tell them everything. Whether they believed me or not didn't matter anymore. I had to try. With my heart pounding in my chest, I gathered my things and headed for the rear emergency exit, away from the main security cameras at the entrance. The West Wing emergency exit door, which normally had only an alarm, was blocked with a thick chain and a new padlock. Firm, measured footsteps echoed behind me in the quiet hallway. "I suspected your resolve would falter, Dr. Mercer," said Eleanor Vance's voice. I turned, terrified. She was standing there, another pre-filled syringe in her hand. "Compassion is a luxury we cannot afford here." "Let me go," I begged, my voice a whisper. "Please, I'll leave and I won't say anything, I swear." "Oaths are broken," she replied, her tone almost paternal, which was obscene. "But lessons endure." She pounced on me. It wasn't a wild fight, but a calculated and efficient move, that of a professional who knows exactly how to immobilize someone. I felt a sharp, cold prick on the side of my neck. A wave of intense cold spread through my veins, followed by an instant heaviness in all my limbs. My muscles stopped responding. I fell to the cold linoleum floor, unable to move, but with my mind terribly awake and aware. It was a paralyzing agent, something from the hospital pharmacy. Eleanor grabbed my arms, and with a strength that seemed impossible for her slender body, began dragging me down the hallway back toward the basement. My head hit the floor, but I barely felt the pain through the chemical haze. The humiliation and terror were absolute. We passed the morgue door, and she entered the adjoining room, the same one we had moved John Doe to. She let go of me, and my body fell like a limp sack onto the concrete floor. "Since you show such concern for the patient's well-being," he said, looking down at me with his icy eyes, "you can take charge of his direct care. Consider this. Accelerated residency." The door slammed shut. I heard the final click of the lock turning, a final snap that sealed my fate. The effect of the paralyzer began to slowly wear off after what seemed like hours, leaving a stinging pain in every muscle. I crawled, on all fours, to the stretcher. John Doe lay there, his breathing a shallow, irregular whine. His eyes, now veiled again by drugs, settled on me. There was no pleading in them now, only a shared emptiness, the recognition that we were both prisoners in this nightmare. Eleanor returned at 7 a.m., just before the shift change. She carried a tray of bland food and a syringe with what I assumed was a maintenance dose for John Doe. "Your shifts have been reassigned," she reported coldly. "You are considered to be on a special research rotation in the basement. No one will ask any questions. No one comes here." "They must miss me," I managed to articulate with my dry mouth. "Inmates are less missed than furniture, doctor. Now feed him, and clean that wound on his side. It's getting infected." And so began my imprisonment. The days lost their meaning. I became John Doe's forced caregiver. At first, I resisted. I would sit in a corner, hug my knees, and rock back and forth in a state of shock. But hunger, thirst, and the constant threat of Eleanor injecting me again, or doing something worse, broke my will. One day, I took the sponge and soapy water she had left and cleaned the infected wound on John Doe's side. My hands were shaking so violently that I spilled water everywhere. He let out a faint moan when the sponge touched his inflamed skin. The sound pierced my brain, but I pressed on. It was the first step in my degradation. I began changing his bandages, administering the medications Eleanor brought, drugs that kept him in a limbo of semi-consciousness. I learned to recognize the signs of incipient sepsis, to smell gangrene. I became his jailer and his nurse, a guardian trapped in the same prison as his prisoner. Sometimes, when Eleanor decided it was time for a procedure, I was her unwitting assistant, holding the lamp, passing her the instruments, applying pressure to a bleeding vessel. I learned the texture of living human flesh under the blade of a scalpel, the hissing sound of the cautery, the subtle crack of stitches piercing the skin. Each act was a violation, a betrayal of everything I was and everything he was. Every time I looked into his eyes, I saw my own distorted reflection, my humanity fading away. John Doe, in his rare moments of clarity, no longer looked at me with hatred or pleading. His gaze was a mirror of my own moral annihilation, a shared emptiness. 3 days passed, or maybe 4. Time was thick, disgusting jelly. One afternoon, or one night, I no longer knew, Eleanor arrived for what she called a practical exploration. She wanted to practice locating a femoral nerve. John Doe was particularly weak, his breathing a faint thread. As she prepared the instruments with obscene academic concentration, I looked at that man, that shell of a human being, and knew he would not survive this. Something broke inside me. It was no longer fear. It was a cold, desperate rage, the rage of a cornered rat. "No," I said, my voice hoarse but firm in the gloomy silence of the room. Eleanor stopped and looked at me, one eyebrow slightly arched. "Excuse me, doctor?" I said no. You're not going to touch him anymore." She smiled, that cold, condescending smile. "You're in no position to give orders, Gary." "Call me Dr. Mercer," I snapped, standing up. My body was weak, but my determination was steel. "And yes, I am. Because if you lay a hand on him, I swear I'll manage to break your neck with my bare hands, even if it's the last thing I do. And then, when they find our bodies, your little practice paradise down here will come to light anyway." For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her steely eyes. She calculated. She measured the madness in my gaze, the utter desperation. She knew I meant it. "You're making a mistake," she said, but her voice had lost a shred of its confidence. "The mistake was not reporting you the first time," I replied. "Now get out. And don't come back." She stared at me for what seemed like an eternity. Then, with a snort of disdain, she gathered her instruments, put them in the canvas bag, and left the room. I heard the lock turn again. I collapsed next to the stretcher, shaking from head to toe. John Doe made a sound, an almost imperceptible sigh. I took his hand. His skin was cold and clammy. It was the first time I had touched him with anything other than instruments or gauze. "I'm sorry," I whispered, and the tears finally came, hot and salty. "I'm so sorry." I knew we didn't have much time. Eleanor wouldn't give up. She would come back with a gun, with more drugs, with something. Or she would just leave us here to die of hunger and infection. I looked around frantically. The room had no windows. The door was solid metal. But there was one thing, the vital signs monitor. It was old, but it had a backup battery. And next to it, on the floor, was an old tangled Ethernet cable that someone had left there years ago, probably during a failed system upgrade. I led it to a jack in the wall that miraculously seemed to be active. A desperate idea took shape in my mind. With hands that were still shaking but driven by a renewed purpose, I unplugged the monitor and used the Ethernet cable to tie the doorknob tightly to a heavy metal shelf full of old files. It wasn't much, but it could delay her for a few minutes. Then I searched the instrument table. I found what I was looking for, a disposable scalpel blade, still in its sterile packaging. I opened it. With a lump in my throat, I approached John Doe. "I have to try," I said, even though I knew he probably couldn't hear me. With a quick, precise movement, I made a small cut on his index finger. I squeezed, getting a drop of dark blood. Then, with my heart pounding in my chest, I approached the monitor. On the back, I found what I expected, a small service port. With the tip of the scalpel, I cleaned the port as best I could and then smeared the drop of blood on the metal connectors. It wasn't a high-tech solution, but I hoped that the blood, being conductive and corrosive, would cause a short circuit in the internal motherboard when it turned on. I plugged the monitor back in. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered, displayed distorted lines, and emitted a sharp crackling sound before the smell of burnt plastic filled the air, and the screen went black forever. A faint smoke rose from the back. It was an act of pure desperation. I hoped that by frying the monitor, it would cause a power surge or a malfunction that, at best, would trigger an alarm in the hospital's main electrical panel. An alarm that someone, somewhere, would have to investigate. I sat down on the floor next to the stretcher, exhausted. John Doe breathed heavily beside me. Minutes passed, then an hour. Nothing happened. Despair began to take hold of me again. Then I heard voices, distant but unmistakable, and footsteps. Several pairs of footsteps approaching down the basement hallway. "Here!" I shouted with all my might, pounding on the door with my weakened fists. "Help! Here!" The footsteps stopped in front of the door. I heard a struggle. "It's locked," said a male voice I didn't recognize. "Back up," ordered another voice. A sharp, forceful blow echoed against the door, then another. The wood around the doorknob began to give way. With a final creak, the lock popped, and the door swung open. In the doorway, illuminated by the dim light from the hallway, stood two police officers with their guns drawn. And behind them, the pale, confused face of Frank, the head janitor. The scene they saw must have been Dantesque. Me, emaciated and dirty, kneeling beside the stretcher, and John Doe, a caricature of a human being covered in scars and infections, his eyes closed, and his breathing barely perceptible. "My God," murmured one of the policemen, lowering his gun. "Nurse Vance," I managed to say, pointing a trembling finger toward the door. "She did this. She's had him here for months." The police officers quickly dispersed. One stayed with me while the other, along with Frank, searched the basement. Minutes later, the paramedics arrived. As they tended to John Doe with restrained urgency and horrified expressions, the other officer returned. His expression was grave. "We found Nurse Vance," he said, "in the morgue. She had injected herself with a lethal dose of something. There's a syringe next to her." I felt no relief, only a deep, cold emptiness. John Doe, whose real name I later discovered was Michael, did not survive the transfer to the city hospital. His body was too badly damaged, too consumed by infection and trauma. The autopsy revealed that the immediate cause of death was massive septic shock, complicated by multiple organ failure. But the real cause of death was Eleanor Vance and her sadistic pursuit of perfection. I reported everything to the police. My testimony, combined with the scene in the basement and Vance's suicide, was enough to close the case. The hospital was investigated, but the administration managed to absolve itself of responsibility, blaming a black sheep with psychological problems. No one else was charged. I was medically discharged for post-traumatic stress. I never put on a white coat again. The nightmares never leave me. The smell of disinfectant still makes me tremble. And worst of all, what torments me every night is not the image of Michael on the stretcher, nor even Eleanor Vance's coldness. It is the memory of my own initial cowardice, that I became, even if only for a brief and terrifying time, his accomplice, the silent guardian of his hell. That is the horror I can never wash away. The one that lives under my skin, reminding me that the deepest evil often comes not with screams, but with the soft click of a door closing and the complicit silence of those who choose not to look. I met Leo in the schoolyard when I was 7, on a September day, when the Arizona sun burned the concrete so hot you could fry an egg on it. I was the new kid, the skinny boy from Phoenix who had moved because my dad had lost his job at a tire factory, and my mom thought a small town like Dusty Creek would build us back up. I carried my Star Wars lunchbox, the Millennium Falcon with the laser beam, which everyone teased me about because it was babyish. And I sat alone under the dry oak tree in the playground, nibbling on my ham sandwich so I wouldn't cry. Leo appeared then, with a cast on his arm hanging like a crooked pendulum, the white cast splattered with doodles from his friends. He had fallen out of a tree in the neighborhood park trying to rescue a stray cat that, ironically, scratched his hand and jumped out before he could reach it. "You're an idiot," his best friend at the time said, but Leo just laughed, that hoarse laugh that sounded like an old engine starting up. He approached my bench without saying a word, took a black marker out of the pocket of his worn shorts, and drew an X. Wing, X-shaped wings, red lasers scribbled furiously, on the plaster cast, just above a heart with the initials of a girl in 5th grade. "So you don't feel alone with that ship," he said, sitting down next to me without permission. There were no formal introductions, no, "Hi, I'm Leo." From that day on, it was Leo and me, an indivisible unit, like the duo Han and Chewie on my lunchbox. He defended me from the bullies who pushed me around at recess. "Touch him, and I'll break your good arm." And I helped him with his math homework, explaining fractions with drawings of pizzas we shared on his porch. We grew up on the same dusty streets of Dusty Creek, a suburb of Arizona where the sun baked the asphalt into heat mirrors, and the biggest crime was painting graffiti on the abandoned water tank at the edge of the desert. We were typical neighborhood kids. We built forts in Leo's backyard, with boards stolen from his dad's garage, plastic tarps that smelled like inflatable pools. and cardboard boxes from appliances my mom threw away. We spent hours there, inventing wars against alien invaders with sticks as blasters, sweating under the fabric roof that leaked when it rained, which was almost never. We watched every horror movie we could get on VHS from the rental store down the street. Night of the Living Dead on a stormy night where the thunder synced with the moans of the zombies. Poltergeist, with popcorn falling on the floor as we jumped. Leo always chose the worst scenes to pause. "Look, the clown. Do you think he could come here?" I was shaking, but his laughter calmed me down. That laughter that made everything seem like an adventure, not a fear. We confessed our first loves to each other on the roof of his garage, lying on our backs, looking at stars that competed with the glow of Phoenix in the distance. Mine was Jenny from 6th grade with braces that sparkled when she smiled. I asked her to a school dance and she stood me up for a guy with a motorcycle. Leo consoled me with ice cream stolen from his freezer and a promise. Girls are stupid. You and me against the world. His first love was Mia, the postman's daughter, who kissed him on the cheek during a minor league baseball game. He blushed so much that his dad called him Tomato for weeks. And the fears. I was afraid of the dark, of being left alone like my dad when he got drunk and yelled at night. Leo confessed one night while camping in the desert, with borrowed tents and cans of hot beans, that he was terrified of losing control, of becoming like his uncle who had ended up in jail for robbing a bank after a family fight. "I don't want to be bad, Dan. I want to be the hero." I hugged him then, under the stars, and we swore we would always have each other's backs. Summers were ours. We stole rusty bikes from the municipal dump and fixed them up in Leo's garage with tools from his dad, who worked double shifts at a copper mine and came home smelling of metal and sweat. We rode to the water tower, spray-painted graffiti with stolen spray cans, Leo plus Dan forever, in bright red, and ran when we heard distant sirens. Once in 10th grade, we got caught. The local sheriff, a fat guy named Harlan, took us home in his patrol car, blue lights spinning like a sick carnival. My mom cried and grounded me for a month without TV. Leo's dad, exhausted in his armchair with a beer, just grumbled, "Don't do it again, boys. The world is screwed up enough as it is." Leo and I laughed later, hiding in the fort, planning our next adventure. Leo was brilliant. He got A's in science without studying, built bottle rockets that flew higher than anyone else's, and had a smile that could disarm anyone. Angry teachers, girls at school parties, me when my parents' divorce had me curled up in a ball, or so I thought. I thought he was the brother I never had, the anchor in my storm. When we turned 22, things started to change, subtly, like a crack in the windshield that you don't notice at first, but that spreads with every bump. I was at Phoenix Community College, studying journalism because I liked writing about real people. I interviewed a Vietnam veteran for the campus newspaper, an article that won me a local award. Living in a dorm room with a sagging mattress and roommates who snored like tractors. Leo had landed a good job as a systems technician for a software company that let him work from home. A luxury in those days of dial-up internet that beeped like an angry modem. His father had left him the family home when he moved to Florida, with a girlfriend 20 years his junior. A small, unassuming single-story house at the end of a cul-de-sac called Willow Lane, with a garage that smelled of oil and a backyard where we had camped as children. At first, everything seemed normal. We would meet on weekends for beers on the porch, watching Diamondbacks games on a TV with an antenna that Leo adjusted with pliers. "Adult life sucks," he would say, popping open a can of Bud with a snap, "but at least I have my cave." He started to become more reserved. He would cancel plans at the last minute. "Sorry, Dan, work is killing me, tomorrow." Or, "I don't feel well, flu or something." At first, I attributed it to stress. The internet boom meant crazy deadlines, midnight calls from bosses in California, to the pressure of adult life that was catching us both by surprise. I would come home exhausted from class, with crumpled notes in my backpack, and he would have dark circles under his eyes that he blamed on too much coffee. I would urge him to go out to meet someone. "Dude, there's a party at the bar downtown. Girls, music." He would always laugh and pat me on the back hard but affectionately. "Relax, Mom, I'm fine. I'm just a little tired. You go, tell me about it tomorrow." But his jokes, once full of light and absurdity, imitating teachers or telling cowboy jokes, sometimes took on a cynical, dark tone, as if he saw the world from a twisted angle. One night, watching The Silence of the Lambs on VHS, one of our favorite movies as teenagers, he said of Hannibal Lecter, "He's smart. He knows that people are just meat waiting to be cut up." I laughed nervously. "You're in a bad mood." He smiled, but his eyes didn't. But there were details. Small cracks in my best friend's perfect facade that I initially ignored, attributing them to loneliness or work. I noticed that he always kept the blinds in his house closed, even on the sunniest days in May, when the sun came in like an unwelcome guest. "It's because of the heat, Dan. The curtains keep it cool," he said, but the house always smelled stale, like a forgotten basement. The smell of his house had also changed. It used to smell like burnt frozen pizza and video games, dusty Nintendo cartridges in the living room, teenage sweat after softball games in the park. Now it smelled of bleach, of excessive, aggressive cleaning that couldn't hide a faint, persistent smell of dampness, like wet earth after a storm, and something sweet that seemed sickening to me, like rotten fruit in a drawer. "You're obsessed with cleanliness," I joked once, smelling the fake Pine air freshener in the bathroom. "Leo, relax." He laughed, but threw the rag harder than necessary into the sink. The straw that began to crack my trust was a conversation about my little brother Ben. Ben was 12 at the time, and he adored Leo like a god. To him, Leo was the cool older brother who let him play violent video games like Doom on his old PC, Don't Tell Your Mom, who talked to him like an equal about girls and comic books, not like the midget my parents saw. Ben would come over to Leo's house on weekends when I had school, and he would come back telling stories. "Leo taught me how to tie a rope bow. He says I'm smart for my age." One October afternoon, sitting on Leo's porch with cold beers, the sun setting orange over the desert hills, I commented, "Ben is growing up so fast. Soon he'll be taller than you, the little bastard." Leo didn't look up from his can, condensation dripping into his hand. "Yeah, he's getting really handsome, isn't he?" The word handsome sounded strange to me, out of place coming from her, like a wrong note in a familiar song. It wasn't the way a family friend, an honorary uncle, talks about a 12-year-old boy. It was appreciative, almost possessive. "Well, he's growing out of being a brat," I said, trying to play it down, taking a long sip to hide the lump in my throat. "He's getting hair on his legs, complaining about his voice changing. He has the same eyes as you," Leo continued, his voice strangely soft, thoughtful, as if reciting a dark poem. "But his smile is different, more innocent. He's beautiful, Dan, really beautiful, like a puppy that doesn't know what's in store for him." I froze, the can sweating in my palm. It wasn't what he was saying. It could have been a clumsy compliment, but how he was saying it. A low, yearning tone with a pause on beautiful that stretched out like rotten honey. His eyes, fixed on the horizon, had a gleam I didn't recognize, a hunger that made my skin crawl. It was a tone that didn't fit with the image of Leo, the lifelong friend who had helped me bury my dog when he died, who lent me money for my first car without asking questions. I shook off the feeling, blaming the heat or the beer. "You're imagining things," I told myself as I drove home, the radio playing softly so I wouldn't think. "It's Leo. He would do anything for Ben, for you. It's just nostalgia." But the seed of doubt was planted, and it grew slowly, its roots spreading with every interaction. I began to notice how he looked at Ben when he came to visit on Saturdays, with an intensity that was not normal, not fatherly. Ben would come running in, backpack slung over his shoulder, with comic books inside, and Leo would greet him with a hug that lasted a second too long, his hand on the back of his neck ruffling his brown hair. "Look who's grown. Tell me about school, champ. Ben laughed, telling him about a soccer game where he scored a goal. But I saw Leo's eyes, not amused but fixed, devouring every gesture, every smile. Once, while Ben was playing in the yard with an old ball, Leo sat down next to me on the porch, beer in hand, and said, "He's so pure, Dan, not like us. He hasn't been touched by the world yet." His voice was low, almost reverent, and his gaze followed Ben rolling around in the gravel, his shorts riding up a little. The knot in my stomach tightened. "Touched how?" He laughed, patting my knee. "You know, the shit of life. Work, women, debt. He still shines." But the sparkle in his eyes was different. One that stung the back of my neck like a mosquito. I tried to ignore it, blaming my post-breakup paranoia. I went out with a girl from college, a journalism classmate named Rachel, with red hair and an easy laugh, but the dates felt forced, kisses that didn't ignite, conversations that drifted to Leo. "Your friend seems cool. Why don't you bring him over?" "He's busy." But the doubt grew. One night in November, Ben came to sleep over at my apartment. My parents were away on a short trip, and the next day I took him to Leo's house to pick up his forgotten backpack. The door was open, and Ben ran inside. "Leo, I brought back the comic book you lent me." I heard Leo laughing from the living room, but when I walked in, Ben was sitting on the couch, Leo too close, his hand on his knee. "Look how strong you are, Ben." "You'll be a man soon." Ben laughed nervously, pulling his leg away. "Yeah, but I'm still a kid." Leo looked at the floor for a second, a tense smile on his face. "For now." I cleared my throat loudly, and Leo got up quickly. "Dan, come in. Beer?" But the air was thick, and I took Ben out with the excuse of homework. In the car, Ben said, "Leo is weird sometimes. He asks me personal questions." "What kind of questions?" "If I have a girlfriend. If I like kissing." The steering wheel slipped out of my hands and I almost crashed into a mailbox. "Tell me if it happens again." Ben nodded, but the damage was done. The last straw was a mutual friend's birthday party in December at a downtown bar with twinkling Christmas lights. Leo arrived late, with deep dark circles under his eyes, but he cheered up with beers. "Dan, the hero of journalism, have you saved the world yet?" We danced with girls, laughed until our sides hurt, but at midnight I saw Leo in a corner with Ben, who had come because I brought him, his hand on his shoulder, whispering something in his ear. Ben laughed but pulled away, coming over to me. "Leo says I'm his favorite, that he'll take me camping." I smiled, but my stomach churned. Later, alone with Leo on the porch of the bar, smoking a cigarette he offered me, I said, "Ben adores you, man. But don't overwhelm him." He inhaled deeply, smoke coming out slowly. "He's special, Dan. I want to protect him, before the world messes him up." His hand on my shoulder tightened, fingers digging in, like us. I pulled away gently, but the warning was there. Don't ask. The following months were a dance of doubts. In January, Ben told me that Leo had given him an old phone for emergencies, but with messages. "Let me know if you need anything, champ. I'm here." I secretly checked the phone. Ben let me do it without knowing, and found photos. Ben in the garden, Ben sleeping on Leo's couch, Ben eating pizza with sauce on his chin. Nothing explicit, but the frequency chilled me. One a day. I confronted Leo in February in his gasoline-smelling garage. The photos of Ben. "Stop it already." He paused the screwdriver. "They're memories, Dan. Don't be paranoid." But his smile was tense, his eyes evasive. "He's my little brother. Respect that." He nodded, but the air between us grew cold. Conversations shortened, invitations fewer. Doubt turned to obsession. I began to notice changes in Leo, his house cleaner. But with locked rooms, junk, smells of disinfectant that stung my eyes. One night in March, we made plans to watch a game, but he canceled. Flew. I impulsively stopped by his house, the door ajar. I went in, my heart pounding, and heard murmurs from the basement. We never went down there as children. I crept down the creaky stairs and saw the basement door ajar, yellow light spilling out. I heard voices. Leo, soft. Sleep, little one. We'll play tomorrow. A muffled sob. I ran away, feeling sick, but I didn't say anything. Evidence, or just paranoia. April brought internal confrontation. Ben came to my apartment, pale. Leo touched me in a weird way. On the shoulder, but below. I hugged him, boiling with rage. Don't go back alone. I called Leo. Come over. Let's talk. He arrived, beer in hand, easy smile. Ben exaggerates, he said. He's a kid. Sensitive. We argued, voices rising. Leave him alone. He laughed. You're jealous. Ben needs me more than he needs you. I left furious, but doubt gnawed at me. What if I was the one who was wrong? The day my world fell apart was a Saturday in May, sticky heat heralding summer. I had arranged to meet Leo to help him install a new TV in his living room. The old one broke, Dan. Come over, bring tools. I arrived at 10, parking my truck on the cul-de-sac, Willow Lane quiet as always. The door was ajar, a breeze moving the screen. I called out a couple of times. Leo, I'm here. And when I got no answer, I went in, the floor creaking under my boots. The house was silent, broken only by the distant hum of Leo's computer in his study, the fan spinning lazily. I thought maybe he had gone out to buy cables at the hardware store. I left the tools on the kitchen table and waited, opening a beer from his fridge. As I walked down the hallway leading to the bedrooms, I noticed that the door to the guest room, which had always been locked, it's a mess full of my father's old junk, Leo would say when I asked, was ajar this time, a triangle of light spilling out like a sinister invitation. An unhealthy curiosity, fueled by weeks of growing doubts that gnawed at me like termites. The photos, the touches, the tone with Ben propelled me forward. I pushed the door slowly, hinges groaning softly, and the air that escaped hit me like a punch. Thick, laden with that aggressive bleach smell that didn't quite mask the sickly sweetness, like meat forgotten in a drawer. The room wasn't cluttered with junk. It was sparsely furnished, bare walls with peeling paint in yellow patches, scratched linoleum floor. There was no furniture to speak of, just 3 thin mattresses thrown on the floor like islands in a sea of emptiness, gray sheets stained with sweat and something darker. And on them, sleeping or unconscious, were 3 children. They couldn't have been more than 9 or 10 years old, thin bodies curled up in fetal positions, pale, waxy skin under the yellow light of a bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. The first, a blond boy with tangled hair stuck to his forehead, had a purple bruise on his right cheek, fresh as if it had been made yesterday, and was breathing deeply, unnaturally heavily, his chest rising and falling in an induced rhythm. The second, dark-skinned with closed eyes and chapped lips, sucked his thumb in his sleep, his baggy pajamas pulled up to his knees, revealing yellow bruises on his legs. The third, a girl of perhaps 8, with unraveled braids and faded freckles, muttered something incoherent, her hand outstretched as if searching for something lost. They wore simple pajamas, too big or too small for them, thin fabric that smelled of cheap soap and stale fear. The air in the room was thick, heavy with that sweet smell of bleach that I now recognized as the stench of something deeply rotten. Children's sweat, dried tears, and underneath, the metallic smell of something worse. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. A blur of disbelief. Nephews, distant cousins, but their ankles, all chained with thick, rusty metal chains, locked with heavy padlocks, attached to steel rings embedded in the cement floor, screamed the truth. They were prisoners, kidnapped, in my best friend's house. Vertigo hit me, my knees weak, the hallway tilting. "What are you doing here?" Leo's voice, right behind me, made me jump violently, my back crashing into the doorframe. I turned around, my heart pounding like a broken drum, and there he was, shopping bag in his left hand, cans of soup, milk, diapers, casual smile but hard eyes, blue like a wolf's. His face showed no immediate anger but a terrifying, calculated calm, as if he had rehearsed this moment. "Leo, who "Who are they?" I stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the mattresses, my voice breaking in my dry throat. "Oh, they're my nephews," he said with a carefree smile that didn't reach his eyes, crossing the threshold to set the bag on the floor. "They're staying with us for a few days. They have a bad flu, so I gave them something to help them rest. Benadryl, nothing serious. Want a beer?" I brought some good ones. The explanation was so ridiculous, so insultingly false. Nieces and nephews, out of nowhere, flu that required chains, that the fear turned to hot anger rising in my chest like bile. "Your nieces and nephews," I repeated, sarcasm dripping, taking a step back to block the door. "I didn't know your sister had children, or that your family used chains for the flu." Leo paused, bag rustling in his hand, and his expression hardened subtly, smile tightening at the corners. "It's my father's family from another state. Problems at home, you know. I'm helping them out. Come on, Dan. Don't be paranoid. It's temporary. Let them sleep." He grabbed my arm tightly, his fingers digging into my biceps like claws, trying to pull me out of the room and into the hallway. But at that moment, the dark-skinned boy stirred in his sleep, rolling slightly, and the blanket covering him slipped down to his waist. And there I saw it clearly, under the harsh light. The thick metal chain, rusty but solid links, closed with a master padlock that hung heavy like a sentence, attached to a steel ring embedded in the cracked cement floor. The padlock had a number engraved on it, 0007. The world stopped, white noise buzzing in my ears, the now unmistakable sweet smell, urine, fear, broken humanity. The horror was so absolute that for a moment I was paralyzed, my legs like lead, my mind screaming run, but my body frozen. Leo followed my gaze to the chain, and his expression broke like thin ice. The mask of normality. The joking friend. The childhood hero cracked, revealing something underneath, something cold and empty. His smile disappeared, replaced by a coldness I had never seen before, his eyes narrowing as he assessed me like struggling prey. "You shouldn't have seen this," he whispered, his voice low and hissing, releasing my arm but blocking the door with his body, bag falling to the floor with cans rolling out. His tone was no longer that of my friend. It was that of a stranger, a predator sizing up his next move. "What have you done, Leo?" I shouted, my voice breaking into an angry sob, taking a step back until I bumped into the blond boy's mattress, who murmured in his sleep, "My God, what is this? They're children, chained up. Since when? Who are they?" He tried to close the door behind him, his hand on the knob trembling slightly. Fear. Anger. But I stepped in, shoulder against the frame, the phantom pain of his grip still burning, the confrontation I had been avoiding for weeks, the touching of Ben, the photos, the tone with my brother, exploded there, in that smelly, narrow hallway, with 3 drugged and unconscious children a few feet away, breathing heavily like accusations. "They're just kids," I yelled, my fists clenched until my nails dug into my palms, hot tears streaming down my face. "Let them go, Leo. How many? How many have you—" "You don't understand," he shouted, losing his temper for the first time, his face reddening, veins bulging in his neck. His eyes glowed with a fanatical and terrifying light, the blue now wild, like that of a cornered animal. "No one understands them. They're special, pure, innocent, and then they become corrupted. They grow up, they become dirty like everyone else, like you, Dan, like me. I save them before the world breaks them. I protect them in their purity. And then I set them free." His words froze my blood, a nihilistic vertigo spinning the room. I set free. A euphemism for murder. He wasn't just a kidnapper. He was a serial killer, a monster who saved children from adulthood by killing them in their innocence. Rest, he had written in the notebook I now imagined in his study. And Ben. God, Ben was next, his favorite, the precious one with the innocent smile. The implied mention of Ben, though I didn't say it, seemed to excite him in a repulsive way, his expression softening into something dreamy, obscene, his pupils dilated in the dim light of the hallway. "Ben is different," he murmured, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper, his hand reaching out as if to touch my shoulder, but stopping short. "He's perfect. That smile, that innocence that still shines through, it's the most beautiful of all. I've been waiting for him to be ready. You don't see it, Dan, but I do. I'll protect him like I protect these, before he grows up and gets dirty." A roar rose in my throat, blind rage pushing me against him, my fist connecting with his jaw in a crack that echoed. "You son of a bitch, don't touch my brother, call the police now." He recoiled, hand over his bleeding mouth, but didn't fight back. Instead, he laughed low, blood staining his teeth. "You're jealous. You always have been. Ben needs me more than he needs you, the absent brother with his shitty journalism." I lunged again, but he pushed me against the wall. Surprising strength in his arms, from carrying so many nephews, knee in my stomach. "Calm down. We can come to an agreement. You leave, you forget, and Ben will be mine when he's ready." The weight on my chest was suffocating me, my vision blurring, but panic gave me strength. I rolled over, kicked his shin, and got up gasping for air. No more deals. I ran to the living room, phone in hand, dialing 911 with clumsy fingers. "Emergency. My friend is children. Kidnapping." Leo caught up with me at the door, grabbing my shirt. "No, I'll kill you." We fought on the threshold, fists flying, my nose cracking under his blow, warm blood dripping. "Police. Willow Lane, 47, I shouted into the phone, falling onto the porch, gravel scraping my back. He was on top of me, hands squeezing my throat, eyes wild. For Ben. For purity. But I heard distant sirens, blue lights spinning in the street, and his weight lifted, fleeing into the woods behind the house. The police arrived in minutes, vans roaring, guns drawn. They found the 3 children in the room, still sedated but alive, chains cut with bolt cutters. In the basement, more horror. An industrial freezer full of resting places. The bodies of 2 more children, frozen in pajamas, dates coinciding with disappearances in news reports from months ago. The notebook in the study, detailed catalog, photos, acquisition notes, children abducted from parks in Phoenix, Tucson. Release crossed out and replaced with eternal rest. Leo denied everything at first. "They're my nephews." But the evidence sank him. Fingerprints on chains, emails to shady contacts on the deep web. The trial was a circus in the county. Months later, the courtroom packed with fans whirring against the summer heat. I testified the first week, my voice trembling on the stand. I saw everything. The children in chains. The notebook with photos of my brother. Ben, now with bodyguards, testified later, his voice small. He touched me strangely. He said I was his favorite. Leo, handcuffed in bright orange, stared at me from the defense table. "Dan, you're lying, out of jealousy." But the jury didn't believe him. Multiple life sentences without parole, charges of kidnapping, abuse, first-degree murder. The parents of the rescued children cried in the gallery. The parents of the breaks screamed when they saw the photos. I didn't go to any hearings after that. My family and I moved to Albuquerque shortly thereafter, selling the farm for nothing, starting from scratch in an apartment overlooking a parking lot. Therapy helps, weekly sessions with a non-judgmental doctor, but it doesn't erase the images. Pale children on mattresses, chains clanking in their sleep, the open notebook with photos of Ben smiling innocently. It doesn't erase the betrayal, how I overlooked the cracks, the closed blinds, the smell of bleach, the tone with Ben. Sometimes, in my nightmares, I don't see the chained children or the trial. I see Leo at 7, with his arm in a cast, sticking that X-wing drawing. And I wonder when the real fracture began. When did the boy who wanted to rescue cats become the monster who chained and destroyed children, saving them from growing up? In high school, when his dad beat him for bad grades. In college, alone with his remote job. And worst of all, the question that will always haunt me at night when Ben sleeps in the next room, now 14 and with a lock on his door. How long was I blind? How many signs did I overlook because he was my best friend, sharing popcorn and secrets, sitting next to me on the couch, waiting for his moment to show his claws? Evil doesn't always have the face of a stranger with scars or tattoos. Sometimes it has the smile of the person you trust the most, the one who looks you in the eye every day for years, laughing at your bad jokes and tells you, "I'm here for you," while planning their next break. The real nightmare isn't discovering the monster in the dark. It's realizing that they were always there, in the light, sharing your beer, and that you, with your blind trust, opened the door for them. It was a normal day, one of those days that pass without leaving a mark, like thousands before it. I remember the October sun filtering through the office windows, casting a golden glow on the reports piled up on my desk. I worked as an administrative assistant at a dental clinic in downtown Boise, Idaho, a red brick building with a sign that read "Healthy Smiles" in cursive letters. A job I didn't love, but that paid the rent on my small apartment in the North End neighborhood. I was 25, single after a breakup with my college boyfriend that ended in a "it's complicated" text, and life felt like a comfortable routine. Black coffee in a to-go cup in the mornings, light traffic on I-84, 8 hours answering calls from patients nervous about fillings and whitening treatments. That Friday, I left at 5 o'clock sharp. The sky still blue but with a touch of orange on the horizon, the crisp autumn air smelling of fallen leaves and smoke from distant chimneys. I called my mom as I walked to the building's underground parking garage, a maze of concrete pillars and fluorescent lights that buzzed like insects. "Mom, are you coming over for dinner on Sunday? Dad's making his chili." She laughed on the other end, her warm voice tinged with that southern accent that drew out the vowels. "Sure, honey. Bring wine. Your father already has enough." We talked about silly things. The neighbor's cat that peed on our porch, the new barista at Starbucks who always spelled my name wrong. Melissa instead of Melissa. I hung up laughing, the phone tucked into my jeans pocket, and searched for my keys in my purse. The parking lot was almost empty at that hour, just a couple of gray sedans and my old blue Honda Civic, parked in its usual spot near the emergency exit. The echo of my heels on the concrete was the only sound, muffled by the thick walls. I opened the car door with a familiar click, tossed my purse onto the passenger seat, and sat down, the cold leather against my legs. I started the engine, the radio tuned to a country station my dad hated but I hummed along to without thinking, something about trucks and lost loves. I backed up, taillights illuminating the B12 pillar, and then I saw him. A man standing at the end of the aisle, cowboy hat pulled low, hands in the pockets of a brown coat. I didn't think much of it. The parking lot was public. People from the office next door used the same spaces. But when I turned toward the exit ramp, his silhouette moved, quickly, deliberately, blocking the way with a step that seemed rehearsed. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching on the wet cement, my heart pounding in my chest like a scared rabbit. "What the hell?" I muttered, headlights bathing him in white. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, broad-shouldered under his jacket, his face hidden by the shadow of his hat, but with a dark beard peeking out. He raised his hands in a gesture of peace, but his eyes, when the light reached them, were cold, calculating, like those of a predator measuring distances. "Sorry, miss," he said, his voice deep with a southern accent, perhaps Texas. "I got the wrong floor. Do you know where the exit is?" My instinct screamed, "Run!" But the parking garage was a maze, up a ramp, but with pillars blocking the view, and panic froze me for a second. "At the end, on the right," I replied, my voice trembling, my hand on the gear shift. He nodded slowly, but didn't move. Instead, he took a step forward, his right hand coming out of his pocket with something that glinted. A long screwdriver, its handle wrapped in electrical tape. "Thank you," he muttered, and the world went blurry. I don't remember the exact blow, only the explosive pain in my right temple, as if a hammer were splitting my skull, my vision clouding over in red. The screwdriver, wielded like brass knuckles, connected with my temple as I tried to turn the steering wheel. The car lurched, headlights sweeping the pillar, and then darkness. My head hitting the steering wheel with a dull thud, warm blood dripping onto my white blouse. I heard his panting above the engine, a door opening, rough hands grabbing my shoulders. Hurry, damn it! And then nothing. A black void. No dreams, no time. I woke up with a headache that pounded like a broken drum, my mouth pasty with the taste of blood and rags. I was in total darkness, stale air smelling of mold and rancid oil, my body numb against a cold, damp cement floor. I tried to move, but my hands were tied behind my back with tape that bit into my skin, my ankles also bound, my knees bent against my chest in a forced fetal position. Panic rose like bile. Where? How long? A moan escaped my throat, and then I heard it. Distant footsteps, echoing in a large space, like an abandoned basement or garage. A door opened with a squeak of rusty hinges. A flashlight sweeping the floor, illuminating my face with a blinding flash. "Wake up, pretty girl," said the voice from the hat, now without a fake accent. Pure Midwestern, maybe Iowa. It was him, tall and broad, jacket off, revealing a sweat-stained t-shirt, dark beard flecked with gray, eyes sunken like wells. Behind him, another man, shorter, thinner, faded tattoos on his arms, carrying a rattling toolbox. "We got her," said the short one, his voice nasal, setting the box down with a clang. The tall one knelt beside me, the smell of tobacco and hot onions in my face. "Melissa Hayes, right? 25 years old, from Boise. Nice name. Your parents must be worried." Terror choked me, my voice coming out in a quack. "What do you want? Money? I have $500 in the bank." I laughed hysterically, salty tears in the corners of my mouth. The tall one chuckled low, gloved hand grabbing my chin. Dirty nails digging in. "Not money, pretty. You. For now." He let go of me, and the short one took a syringe out of the box, a long needle glinting under the flashlight, and jabbed it into my arm without warning. "To make you sleep," he murmured. The liquid fire shot up my vein, double vision, and darkness again. I woke up chained in a room that smelled of damp and old urine, a basement with cracked cement block walls, a bare light bulb hanging from a buzzing wire. The chain on my right ankle, thick links, rusty padlock, was attached to a lid pipe in the wall, giving me 2 meters of radius to move around in a 4x4 square. A dirty mattress on the floor, a plastic bucket for my needs, a metal plate with murky water. There was no window, only a reinforced steel door with an external latch. Time dissolved into cycles of hunger and drug sleep. They brought me watery soup in a tin bowl, stale bread, once a day. The guard pushing the tray through a hatch in the door. "Eat, Melissa. Stay strong," he said, his voice casual, as if he were chatting about the weather. I asked for names. "Who are you? Why me?" But he just laughed. "I'm Roy. He's Cal, and you're our guest. For 3 months, maybe more." The first few days were pure psychological torture. The basement, a black hole that devoured time. They took my watch, my phone, no signals down here, and the hours melted into a limbo of darkness, interrupted by the light bulb that flickered like a sick eye. Roy came in twice a day, morning for the tray, night to check. At first, he just talked. "Good work at the clinic, Melissa. Your patients love you." Details of my life that chilled me. Names of colleagues, my route to work, the coffee I ordered at Starbucks. "I saw you yesterday. Skinny jeans. Nice." I tried to reason. "My family will pay. Let me go." He would crouch close, chain jingling, hot breath. "It's not about money. It's for fun. And you're fun." Cal, the bass player, was worse. Silent, sunken eyes that pierced me. Sometimes he brought an old book. "Read. It passes the time." But he would throw it on the floor, laughing when I failed to catch it. The physical torture began the first week, when hunger weakened me. Insufficient soup, moldy bread that scratched my throat. Roy came in one night, flashlight in hand, and dragged me by the chain to the center of the basement, cement scraping my bare skin. They had taken my clothes away on the second day, to save on laundry, leaving me with only an old t-shirt and worn-out panties. "Time to play," he said, his voice playful, pulling an extension cord out of the box. He plugged it into a wall socket. A buzzing sound filling the air and pressed it against my thigh. The shock was like liquid fire, my muscles convulsing, a scream tearing from my throat until it came out hoarse. "Stop, please." It lasted seconds, but it felt like hours. He repeated it 3 times, on my arm, on my back, leaving red marks that burned like embers. "Good girl," he murmured, turning it off, and left me lying there, body shaking, warm urine wetting the floor. Cal watched from the doorway, chuckling softly. "Scream more. I like it." The abuse came later, when the pain broke me. The second week, Roy came in alone, chain pulling at my ankle until I fell to my knees, cement biting into me. "You're pretty when you cry," he said, his hand in my hair pulling my head back, his mouth forcing mine, tongue bitter with tobacco, teeth clashing. I resisted, nails scratching his arm, but he laughed, a punch to my stomach bending me over, air rushing out in a whoosh. "Be still, or Cal will bring the cable." He forced me down onto the mattress, his heavy body on top of me, his hands tearing my shirt, skin against cold skin. I cried, bit his shoulder, until I tasted blood, but he just growled, "That's it, fight. It turns me on." It lasted for what felt like an eternity, pain tearing through me like glass, tears mixing with sweat. When he was done, he got up, adjusted his belt, and threw me a dirty rag. "Clean yourself up, more tomorrow." He left, the door slamming behind him, and I curled up on the floor, sobbing quietly, my body a map of bruises and shame. Cal was different, his abuse slower, psychological. He would come in during the day, sitting on the mattress with a folding chair, chain jingling. "Tell me about your family," he would say, his voice nasal, his eyes fixed like a lizard's. At first, I resisted. Go to hell. But hunger, smaller portions after I resisted, and isolation, days without seeing light, only the buzzing light bulb, broke me. I spoke. About my parents in Boise, my sister in Seattle, Ben, my 5-year-old nephew whom I adored. Cal wrote in a worn notebook, laughing, "Nice. Roy will want to meet them." His touches were subtle at first, a finger tracing my arm, soft skin, but they escalated. One night, he forced me to kneel, his hand on the back of my neck, forcing me, "Suck or you don't eat." I vomited afterward, bile in the bucket, but he laughed. "You learn fast." The abuse became routine. Roy physical, brutal, Cal mental, degrading, forcing me to confess secrets. My first time, childhood fears, while his hand explored, invasive fingers making me bleed. The months melted into a hell of survival. 2 months. The basement became my world, cement etching patterns into my back as I slept. Chain rubbing against my ankle, infected sores that Roy healed with alcohol that burned like fire. I tried to escape once, in the 3rd week. Roy came in distracted, tray in hand, and I kicked his knee, chain stretching to its limit. I ran 3 steps, the door inches away, but Cal came out of the shadows, punching me in the temple, knocking me down, my vision exploding into stars. "Bad girl," Roy said, dragging me by my hair, cable plugged in until I peed myself from the pain, my body convulsing. No more visitors. They left me 3 days without food, only dirty water, hallucinations of my mom calling. 3 months. The rescue. My parents never gave up. They reported me missing the next day. She didn't come home, her car in the empty parking lot. And they didn't stop. Flyers on every pole in Boise, calls to the FBI, searches with dogs in the desert. Special Agent Ruiz, a tough woman with a scar on her cheek, followed leads. My purse in the car, blood on the steering wheel, blurry parking lot, CCTV showing Roy's gray sedan. "We have suspects," she told me later, in the hospital, her voice hoarse from smoke. "Roy Harlan, ex-convict for assault in Texas. Cal Withers, his cousin. History of drugs." They tracked them to an abandoned farm 80 kilometers away, a hidden basement under the barn. They entered at dawn on day 87, tear gas and shotguns, Roy and Cal handcuffed on the muddy floor. They found me curled up, chain cut with bolt cutters, screaming "Mommy!" until I was hoarse. Roy and Cal were arrested. Life imprisonment for kidnapping, abuse, attempted murder. But the third one, the one who drove the sedan and took the children, according to Cal's notebook, escaped. A certain Vance, with no criminal record, vanished into the desert. The FBI is looking for him, but it's been a year, and nothing. My parents saved me. Their unshakable faith, Mom praying novenas, Dad selling the farm to pay for private investigators. But the memory haunts me. Darkness, chains, hands. I survived, but the basement lives on inside me. I never thought the silence of an empty room could sound so loud. There is something unnatural about the echo left by a half-open door, in the gap left by an untidy bed. It is the sound of absence, of absolute emptiness, and it is the sound that has accompanied me since that Tuesday when my son, Oliver, disappeared. He was 9 years old. He was a quiet boy, somewhat withdrawn, with that obsessive curiosity about trains that only intelligent, lonely children can have. I was, and still am, a civil engineer, and at the time I was working for a construction company on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. His mother, Laura, had died 3 years earlier, a devastating cancer that left us both broken, but he clung to me with a strength that gave me meaning. I did the same with him. We were two survivors trying to learn to breathe in the same house. The day he was kidnapped began with a routine so mundane that I will never forget it. Oliver ate cereal with milk, sitting on the counter, while I leafed through the newspaper and drank coffee. It was cold, the kind of dry cold that cuts into your skin when you breathe. He was carrying his blue backpack with an Amtrak patch sewn on the top. Before he left for the school bus, he hugged me, as usual. "I love you, Dad," he said. I replied the same, distracted, thinking about a meeting I had that morning. I watched him get on the yellow bus, waving through the window, and told myself I should come home early so we could watch a movie together that night. I didn't. At 3:45 p.m., the bus was supposed to drop him off at the usual corner, 2 blocks from the house. At 4:10, when he hadn't arrived, I felt a knot in my stomach. At 4:30, the knot turned into a dark certainty. I called the school. They told me that Oliver had left as usual with his classmates and that they had seen him get on the bus. I called the transportation district. They confirmed that the bus had made all its stops without incident. No one had seen him get off. I ran out of the house without a jacket, shouting his name throughout the neighborhood. No one had seen anything. The neighbors, alarmed, came out to help me. I called 911 at 4:58 p.m. My voice was shaking so much that the operator had to ask me to repeat my address 3 times. The next few hours were a whirlwind of red and blue lights, police officers coming and going, questions repeated until I was exhausted. They searched the bus, talked to the driver, talked to other children. No one remembered seeing him get off. It was as if he had evaporated in the 20-minute journey between school and my street. At 10 o'clock that night, a detective from the Columbus Police Department, Sergeant Miller, asked me to sit down. He looked at me with that mixture of pity and professional coldness that only men accustomed to tragedy know how to maintain. "Mr. Wallace, we have to be clear. After 6 hours, this is no longer a common disappearance. We are considering the possibility of kidnapping." I remember staring at him, not fully understanding what he was saying. The word kidnapping bounced around in my head, meaningless at first. It wasn't something that happened to people like me. It was something I saw on the news, in violent cities, not in a quiet suburb with white picket fences and painted mailboxes. I didn't sleep that night. The officers set up a command center in my living room. The tracking dogs followed his scent to an intersection about 4 blocks away, where the bus stopped. Then nothing. The trail went cold. The driver swore that Oliver had gotten off with the others. The children gave confusing accounts. Some said they had seen him, others weren't sure. None of them remembered anything out of the ordinary. The next morning, the local news was already talking about the case. 9-year-old boy disappears after getting off the school bus. They showed my photo next to his. I appeared with a blank stare, my hands clenched around a coffee cup. Journalists camped out in front of my house. Neighbors who barely greeted me at the supermarket now left flowers and teddy bears in my yard. It was all grotesque. 2 days later, the call came. It was January 14th, at 3:17 a.m. The phone rang with a tone that jolted me out of my insomnia. I answered without thinking. "Mr. Wallace." The voice was male, distorted. "Listen carefully. We have your son." I was speechless. The air froze in my lungs. "He's alive for now," the voice continued. "If you want to see him again, you're going to have to cooperate. Please, where is he? What have you done to him? Just tell me." "Shut up." The tone was so flat, so devoid of emotion, that it pierced me like a sheet of metal. $30,000, $20 and $50 bills, no marks, no trace. You have 48 hours. If you talk to the police, we'll know, and the boy will die. Then the most chilling sound I've ever heard in my life, ragged, sobbing breaths, and a small, trembling voice. "Dad, Oliver, Oliver, my love, I'm here," I shouted. "Dad, I'm scared." A thud, a muffled groan, then silence. "Now he knows we mean business," said the man. "Wait for instructions. We'll call you back." The line went dead. I stood there, the receiver pressed to my ear, listening to the dead tone. The shaking started in my hands and spread throughout my body. I threw up on the kitchen table. When the detectives arrived, I tried to repeat everything to them, word for word. They warned me that the kidnappers might be watching me, that any impulsive move could put Oliver at risk. They wanted to trace the next call. They told me not to answer until the 3rd ring. I felt like a puppet with broken strings. The next few hours dragged on with cruel slowness. I couldn't eat. I couldn't think. Every sound made me jump. I began to notice things I hadn't seen before. A car parked too long in front of my house, a drone flying over the garden, the crackling of branches in the backyard. Paranoia was my only companion. The second call came the next day at 11:42 p.m. "Do you have the money?" the voice asked. "I'm gathering it," I lied. The FBI had warned me not to negotiate directly, but they also told me that prolonging the communication increased the chances of tracing the source. "Don't lie, Mr. Wallace. It's not in your best interest. We know you work for Henderson & Co. We know your savings account has just over $36,000. You have the money. Don't be stupid." My throat closed up. They knew everything. They knew my job, my account. I felt the walls closing in on me. "What do you want me to do?" "Be ready tomorrow at 6 o'clock sharp. We'll call you and tell you where to leave the money. If you try anything, if there's a single cop nearby, we'll pick up your son's body in pieces. Understood? Please, let me talk to him. I just want to know he's okay." Silence. Then the boy's voice, barely a whisper. "Dad." And again, a thud. A muffled cry. The call ended. That night, while the police analyzed the recordings, I locked myself in the bathroom. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back at me. Deep dark circles under my eyes, ashen skin, chapped lips. I wasn't a father. I was a cornered animal. At dawn, I went to the bank. I withdrew everything I had. The manager, a fat man with a silky voice, looked at me suspiciously. $30,000 in cash is a considerable amount, Mr. Wallace. Could you tell me what for? It's a family matter, I said through clenched teeth. The wads of bills weighed more than I had imagined. I stuffed them into an old black backpack, the same one I used to go to the gym. When I left, I realized I had no idea what I was going to do. I only knew that if I didn't obey, Oliver would die. At 6 o'clock sharp, the phone rang. "Go alone," said the voice. "Take Highway 71 south. Drive to exit 148, the turnoff for Mount Sterling. When you see a sign for Old Creek Road, stop and wait for further instructions." "What about my son? Is he alive?" "That's up to you." I hung up, grabbed my keys, and drove. I didn't say anything to the police. I couldn't risk it. I checked the rear view mirror every few seconds, convinced I was being followed. The highway was a ribbon of endless darkness. The radio was off. My mind repeated my son's name like a mantra. When I reached the indicated exit, the night was dense and the wind was icy. Old Creek Road was a rural road full of potholes surrounded by bare trees. I stopped at the edge, with the engine running. A few minutes later, my phone rang. "Get out of the car. Leave the backpack by the sign. Walk 20 steps back and wait." I obeyed. The branches crunched under my boots. I left the backpack on the ground. The silence was absolute. I waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The cold cut into my face. Suddenly, I heard something. A sharp metallic noise behind the trees. I turned around. A dark pickup truck emerged from nowhere, without lights. It stopped next to the sign. A hooded man got out, picked up the backpack, and got back in. I ran toward them, screaming, "Where's my son? You sons of bitches, give me back my son!" The engine roared. The truck took off, throwing dirt in my face. I ran after it, uselessly, until my legs gave out. I fell to my knees in the mud, gasping for breath, and screamed until I was hoarse. The police found me there an hour later. Someone had reported the vehicle. When I told them what had happened, Detective Miller's anger was restrained but palpable. "We told you not to act alone. We could have tracked them, intercepted them." "They had my son," I shouted. "You don't understand. They were beating him." That night, they checked the traffic cameras. There was no trace of the truck. It was as if it had never existed. And we still didn't know if Oliver was alive. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I didn't speak for hours. The police came and went from the house as if I were invisible. They repeated empty words: protocol, tracking, jurisdiction, interagency cooperation. None of them contained the only thing I wanted to hear. "We have him." Detective Miller tried to keep me sane. Sometimes he would stay with me in the kitchen drinking cold coffee. He had a weathered face, the sunken eyes of someone who has seen too many broken parents. "This isn't over," he would say to me in that firm voice that people use when they no longer believe what they are saying. "They're going to kill him," I would reply. "They won't if they can still get more money out of you." It was a monstrous consolation, but it was the only thing that kept me going. On the third day, the first text message arrived. It was from an unknown number. "We're warning you. Don't talk to the police. We know everything." Attached was an audio file. My hands were shaking so much that I almost dropped the phone. I played it. It was Oliver's voice. He was crying. In the background, I could hear metallic noises like chains hitting a wall. "Dad, please. I'm cold." Then a thud. A scream. And silence. I ran to Miller. I showed him the phone. They took it, copied the data, and connected it to a tracking system. They forced me to turn it off. They told me not to respond, not to react. But how could I not? How could I contain the urge to write, "I'm coming, my love. Hang in there." That night, the house was full of agents and screens. The FBI had already become formally involved. They analyzed the calls, cross-referenced data, compared voice patterns. Nothing. The message's signal came from a cell tower in Cincinnati, 100 miles to the south, too broad, too diffuse. At dawn, I received another call. I didn't wait for it to ring 3 times. I answered on the first ring. "Mr. Wallace, you failed to keep your end of the bargain." His tone was different, calmer, almost bored. "I didn't tell them anything. I swear. You took the money. I did everything you asked. And yet you spoke to the police. They're at your house. We saw them go in. You lied to us. Please don't hurt them." The man sighed. "We don't kill for pleasure, Mr. Wallace, but there are consequences." Then I heard a noise, a sharp thud, then a scream, high-pitched, brief. "You'll learn," said the man before hanging up. I fell to my knees. I don't remember if I screamed. I think I did. Miller held me by the shoulders as I tried to get the air out of my lungs. "It could be an old recording," he said, trying to stay logical in the midst of hell. "They could be manipulating the audio." But I knew with the coldest certainty. They had hit him. The following days dissolved into a fog. There was no sunrise or sunset, just the constant hum of generators and the murmur of agents. They searched every inch of my house, every file on my computer, every call I had made in recent months. They began to suspect that the kidnapping was not random. "Have you had any conflicts at work, Mr. Wallace?" asked an FBI agent, a young woman with a soft voice. "I work in construction. The most conflictive thing I do is argue about budgets. Any debts, personal problems, just the usual. My wife died. Since then, nothing else." She looked at me with that clinical expression of someone assessing whether you are hiding something. Then she nodded. But I was hiding something. Not something criminal, but something I was ashamed of. 2 months before the kidnapping, I had received an under-the-table offer to approve a fraudulent bid in exchange for a payment. I turned it down, but the person who offered it to me, a businessman named David Kress, didn't take the rejection well. He threatened to make my life miserable. At the time, I thought it was just talk. Now, I wasn't so sure. I mentioned his name to Miller. The detective wrote it down without showing any emotion. He said they would look into it. 3 days later, the investigation was still at a standstill. No clues, no witnesses, no cameras. The news got tired of showing my face until the next tragedy distracted them. That's when I decided to go it alone again. At midnight, without telling anyone, I went to the garage. I had the phone they used to call me, one of those old keypad models. I turned it on. A new message appeared almost immediately. "We knew you'd come back. If you really want to see him, come alone. This is your last chance." There was an address attached. A place in the south, near the Scioto River, an abandoned industrial area. The message ended with one sentence: "Bring him back, or bring him dead." I didn't think twice. I took the gun that had belonged to my father, an old Colt which I never imagined I would use, and drove there. The city was asleep. The lights from the empty warehouses reflected off the murky water of the river. The place smelled of rust and old oil. The air was thick and still. I walked between the warehouses. Every shadow seemed to move. Every drop of water falling from the pipes made me turn. I walked to the designated building. The door was ajar. "Oliver," I whispered. Inside, everything was dark. I used the flashlight on my phone. On the floor was a box, black, metal, with my name engraved by hand, Wallace. My heart was pounding in my chest. I knelt down. I opened it. Inside was an envelope and a photograph. The envelope contained a folded piece of paper. "Never approve a contract without knowing who is signing it." The photo showed Oliver. He was sitting in a chair, tied up with tape over his mouth. His eyes, swollen, looked directly at me. But it wasn't his gaze that froze me. It was the background. I recognized the place. It was my own garage. I backed away, stunned. I felt dizzy, deeply nauseous. I ran to the car. I got in like a madman, checked every corner. Nothing. I ran up to the house. I went into the garage. Everything seemed normal. Tools, boxes, Oliver's bike. But something didn't fit. A dark stain on the floor, behind the shelf. I moved the boxes. There was a piece of rope with traces of adhesive tape, and marks on the cement, as if something had been dragged. I fell to the floor. I screamed his name until I was hoarse. I called Miller. I told him everything. They arrived in minutes. They searched the place with flashlights, took samples, sealed off the area. That morning, the detective looked at me with an almost paternal weariness. "Mr. Wallace, This changes things. If that photo is recent, it means they had her here, in your own home. What do you mean? That someone who knew the place, who knew your routines, was here, and is probably still nearby. From that moment on, my house was no longer a refuge. It became a scene of horror. Every piece of furniture, every corner could hide a clue or a trap. I couldn't sleep without hearing footsteps in the hallway, breathing that was perhaps only my own. The agents installed hidden cameras. They collected fingerprints. They found a partial print on the garage window. It matched a former employee of the construction company. No one knew where he was. The name made my blood run cold. Kress. The next day they arrested him, but he didn't confess to anything. He said he didn't know anything about a kidnapping, that he had lost his job weeks ago. His alibi was weak, but not enough to hold him. They released him. That night, the phone rang again. "You thought you could save him by handing over an innocent man," said the voice. "But this game isn't won with arrests. It's won with obedience. Please, don't touch him. Do whatever you want with me, but let him go." The voice laughed, a dry, broken laugh. "You're already dead, Wallace. You just don't understand it yet." And he hung up. The next morning, the agents found an envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a lock of blonde hair, tied with a red ribbon. It was my son's hair. After seeing the lock of hair, something inside me broke. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the red ribbon as if I could find an explanation in it. Detective Miller was talking to me, but I wasn't listening. The words bounced around in my head like stones in a dry well. That night, when everyone left, I sat on the living room floor. The television was on, but I wasn't watching anything. The house smelled of dust, confinement, old fear. I thought of Oliver's eyes in the photo, of the way he called me Dad in his hoarse voice, and I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I took the gun, the keys, and drove. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to move, to breathe away from those walls. I ended up on the old road, the one that skirts the forest and leads to the county line. There, where the phone signal cuts out and the houses are just shadows among the trees. I remembered something. Once, when Oliver was 10, we had gone fishing at a nearby lake. One of the guys on the dock, a big man with a scar on his neck, told me about shady business in the area. He said there were people doing nasty things, with kidnappings, collections, and blackmail. I never believed him, but now every word made sense. I drove to the old pier. The lake was dark and still, as if it were also waiting for something. There was a half-collapsed shed. Inside, there were the remains of boxes, drums, and an old table. In one corner, a security camera hung from the ceiling, disconnected but still pointing toward the door. I stared at it for a long time. Then I heard something. Footsteps. They weren't imaginary. They came from outside, from the other side of the wall. I stood still, holding my breath. A man appeared at the door. Tall, thin, wearing a hoodie. His hands were in his pockets. He looked at me without surprise, as if he were expecting me. "Who are you?" I asked, pointing my flashlight at him. "That doesn't matter. I came to help you." His voice was low, rough. He said he knew who had kidnapped my son, that they weren't just criminals, but an organized network that blackmailed businessmen. They used the children, the wives, the siblings. Sometimes they return them, sometimes they don't. I didn't believe him, but his words fit too well with the FBI's silence, with the ineffectiveness, with the photos, with everything. "Where is he?" I asked. "I can't say. If you knew, you'd be dead before you got there." He gave me an address written on a dirty piece of paper. "Go there tomorrow, alone. They'll show you what you need to see." When I raised my flashlight again, he was gone. I slept poorly. I dreamed of Oliver in a dark room, asking me to turn it off, to stop looking. The next morning, I drove to the address. It was a warehouse on the outskirts of a forgotten town. There was no one there. The door was locked, but when I pushed it, it gave way with a creak. The air inside was thick, heavy. There was a sour, metallic smell. In the center was a table. On top of it was a box. I approached it carefully. I opened it. Inside was a video camera. It was on. The screen showed a recording. Oliver was in a small room with concrete walls. He looked drugged. He could barely keep his head up. A voice off camera told him to look ahead, and then he whispered something. I didn't understand. I rewound the video. I turned up the volume. "Dad, no, don't come." That phrase cut through me like a knife. Then the camera shook. The image became distorted. For a moment, in a reflection on the glass, I saw a face. Mine. I threw the camera on the floor. I ran outside, breathing heavily. The cold air cut into my face. Everything was spinning. If Oliver had been recorded in my house, and now that recording was here, then someone had been watching me from within. I ran back home. I checked every corner, every vent, every outlet. I found 3 hidden cameras, one in the dining room lamp, another in the bathroom door frame, and a third, tiny one, behind the kitchen clock. When I showed them to Miller, the man turned pale. "This isn't a common kidnapping," he muttered. "It's personal." "Personal," I shouted. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means someone wants to destroy you slowly, not just take your child away. They want you to watch you lose him." From that day on, the house was filled with more agents, more cameras, more control, but the terror had already taken hold. I woke up to noises that no one else heard. I heard footsteps on the roof, shadows moving behind the curtains. One night, while reviewing the recordings from the news system, I saw something. A figure entering the garage. At 3:14 a.m., his face was covered, but his movements were precise, calm, as if he knew every corner. I called Miller. They sent a team. They found nothing. But on the camera, when they zoomed in, they saw a detail. A blue cap. The same one worn by one of the workers who had worked with me months earlier. His name was Raymond Holt. I knew him well. He had been to my house. He had played with Oliver. I told the FBI everything. They said they would locate him. But the next day, Holt was found dead. Apparently, it was suicide. A gunshot to the head, in his car. And in the passenger seat, a box. Inside, a photo of my family. Me, my wife, and Oliver, in the park years ago. The back had an inscription in red marker. "Memories weigh heavy. Learn to let them go." After that, Miller left the case. He said he was being transferred, but I knew that wasn't true. There was something in his eyes, something fearful. The new agent was a young, inexperienced guy. He seemed more interested in filling out forms than finding my son. He talked to me about following protocols, waiting for lab results. He didn't understand that every hour was a sentence. So I went back to acting on my own. I went back to the lake shed, the warehouse, every place he had been. I posted photos, maps, names, red threads. My house became a sanctuary of madness. I barely ate. I would wake up with a start, convinced I heard Oliver's voice in the hallway. One night, while reviewing old recordings from the hidden cameras, I saw something that made me lose control. A video clip from the day before the kidnapping. Oliver playing in the garden. And behind him, on the fence, a man watching. Motionless. His face was out of focus, but his posture, the way he tilted his head. It was me. For hours, I convinced myself it was an optical illusion, a coincidence, an overlap. But the more I looked at it, the clearer it became. The clothes, the height, even a slight twitch in the shoulder. I felt like I was falling apart. What if all this had started earlier, much earlier than I remembered? What if someone had been copying me, following me, becoming me? The police never confirmed anything. The case went cold. The leads ran dry. The agents left. The press forgot. Only silence remained. And the boxes. Yes, because they kept coming. First one with the blue cap, then another with a small shoe, the left one, the one Oliver lost on the beach the previous summer. Then one more, a videotape. I watched it only once. I'm not going to describe what it contained. I can't. I'll just say that when it ended, I understood that hell is not a place. It's a sequence of images you can't forget even if you want to. 3 years have passed since then. I don't know if Oliver is still alive. Sometimes I like to think that he is, that someone saved him, that he's far away, safe. But the truth is, I have no proof of anything. Sometimes I get messages from unknown numbers. They don't say anything. They just send photos of objects, places, my house, from angles I don't recognize. 2 weeks ago, I found a box on the porch, no return address. Inside, a key, my garage key, and a note that said, "It never ended." That night, I slept in my car. Every sound, every light from passing cars made me jump. I don't trust anyone. I don't talk to anyone. Sometimes I think they all know, that they were all involved. The neighbors, the police, the guy at the supermarket. And yet, every morning I keep waiting. I check the mailbox before the sun comes up. Sometimes it's empty, sometimes it's not. Last night there was a small box, inside a baby tooth. I don't know if it's Oliver's, but I know it is. What I don't understand, what keeps me awake, is a single question. How long have they been watching me? And more importantly, are they still doing it? It was just another Tuesday, the kind of day that slips through the cracks of routine without anyone noticing. But for me, it became the beginning of the end of everything I thought I knew about my life. I was 19, in my second year of college studying literature, and that afternoon, after an endless class on feminist theory that left my head buzzing with ideas about power and betrayal, I met Chloe, my best friend since we were 6, at the campus cafe. We met in first grade when she defended me from a bully who was teasing me about my thick glasses, and we've been inseparable ever since. We shared everything: hysterical laughter about eccentric professors, tears over bad grades, even clothes that didn't fit us the same but made us feel connected. That day, the cafe was full of students murmuring about exams and parties, the aroma of espresso and vanilla floating in the air, and we occupied our usual table by the window, overlooking the quad where autumn leaves were beginning to fall like melancholy confetti. We talked about everything and nothing as usual. I told her about the disaster that had been my breakup with Jake the week before. He had cheated on me with a girl from his fraternity, and I still felt the knot in my stomach every time I remembered the text message that confirmed it. Chloe listened with that look of fake empathy she used when she wanted to change the subject, nodding as she stirred her latte with a teaspoon. "Men," she finally said, rolling her eyes. "They're like puppies, cute until they pee on your carpet." I laughed because her humor always pulled me out of my pits of self-pity, and for a moment, the world felt normal again. Then she leaned forward, her mischievous smile lighting up her freckled face, and said, "I have a surprise for you." Her eyes sparkled with that spark of adventure that always drew me into her crazy plans, like the time we snuck into the stadium to see a free concert, or when we escaped the city for a day just to eat ice cream on the beach. "I met some amazing friends at that party last week," she continued, lowering her voice as if she were sharing a state secret. "They have a cabin on the lake for this weekend. Pool, barbecue, and zero ex-boyfriend drama. It's going to be epic, Mel. You and me, disconnecting from the world." Normally, I would have hesitated. My parents had always taught me to be cautious, to check addresses and schedules before getting into a car with strangers. But it was Chloe. I trusted her more than anyone else, more than my own instincts sometimes. Besides, I needed a break. College was crushing me with essays and existential doubts, and Jake's betrayal had left me feeling like an empty shell. "Okay, I'm in," I replied, drinking the last sip of my bitter coffee, ignoring the slight tingle of unease in the back of my mind. She clapped her hands excitedly, and we planned the details. I would bring snacks in my favorite bikini. She would take care of transportation. "It's going to be legendary," she promised, and I believed her. On Friday afternoon, the air was thick with that autumnal crispness that smells of damp leaves and imminent change. I was packing my backpack in my dorm room when Chloe knocked impatiently on the door. I descended the stairs of the dorm building with a light heart. humming a silly pop song we had sung together in the car last time. Outside, a shiny black SUV I didn't recognize was waiting. It wasn't her old beat-up Honda we'd taken so many trips in. "It's one of my friends," she explained quickly as she loaded my backpack into the trunk, her voice a little too casual. "It has better traction for getting to the cabin. The road is a bit off-road." Something about her tone struck me as odd, as if she were reciting a rehearsed line, but I chalked it up to pre-trip nerves. Chloe was always a little eccentric, impulsive, and I was too excited to get away to question it. I opened the back door of the SUV and climbed in, only to find two men sitting there whom I didn't know at all. My stomach did a subtle flip, but Chloe was already starting the engine, chatting animatedly about traffic. "These are my friends," she said, not introducing them by name, just a vague wave of her hand as she turned the steering wheel. The one in the middle seat was tall and thin, with an irregular scar crossing his left eyebrow, like a white lightning bolt against his olive skin, and eyes that kept looking at me in the rearview mirror. The other, pressed against the window, was shorter and stockier, with broad shoulders that strained his leather jacket, and he said nothing. He just stared at the passing landscape, his jaw clenched as if he were chewing on something invisible. I tried to strike up a conversation, asking about the cabin. Did it have kayaks? Was there Wi-Fi? But his answers were monosyllabic grunts. Chloe filled the silences with exaggerated anecdotes from the party where she met them, but her laughter sounded forced, and the air inside the car felt thick, heavy with an uncomfortable silence. As we left the city, the conversation died down like a campfire without wood. The bustle of traffic lights and tall buildings gave way to secondary roads flanked by yellow fields and skeletal trees, and then to dirt roads that rattled the SUV, causing my head to bounce against the headrest. I glanced at my phone. 1 bar of signal, then nothing. Panic began to seep in, a cold trickle down the back of my neck. "Chloe, are you sure you know where you're going?" I asked, trying not to let the tremor in my voice show, reaching out to touch her shoulder, as I used to do when we got nervous on past trips. She didn't turn around. She just stared ahead, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Relax, Melissa," she replied, but her voice sounded different, more tense. Colder, like the edge of a knife wrapped in cotton. The man with the scar chuckled softly from behind, and the burly man shifted in his seat, his knee accidentally, or not, brushing against mine. The sun was sinking below the horizon when we finally stopped, the engine purring to a halt in a clearing surrounded by dense pine trees. It wasn't in front of a cozy lakeside cabin with a porch and warm lights. It was a decrepit, half-collapsed structure with rotten planks and a sloping roof that dripped with condensation. The trees were so thick that the sunset barely filtered through orange rays, painting everything in elongated shadows. Before I could protest, "This doesn't look like what you described." I felt rough hands grab me from behind like iron claws. The burly man pinned my arms down, his hot, stale breath on my neck, while the man with the scar pulled out a rag soaked in some chemical, a sweet, cloying smell like stale gum mixed with gasoline. I tried to scream, to turn toward Chloe, but she just stared ahead, motionless like a statue. The rag covered my nose and mouth, and the world faded into a sticky darkness. My last thoughts, a whirlwind of betrayal and panic. Why? Chloe, why? I woke up with a throbbing pain in my head, as if someone had driven a pickaxe into my temple, and my mouth was dry as sandpaper, with a metallic aftertaste that made me nauseous. I was lying on a dirty mattress on the floor of what looked like a basement, the air stale and heavy with the smell of mold and damp earth. I tried to sit up, but metal handcuffs held my wrist to a rusty pipe running along the wall, the cold biting into my skin and leaving red marks where I had twisted in my induced sleep. Panic rose in my throat like bile, a living, pulsating animal choking me. I took a deep, gasping breath, remembering fragments of an article I had read in a psychology class about survival in kidnappings. Stay calm, Observe details. Show no weakness. The room was small with cracked cement walls covered in dark stains I didn't want to identify, rusty shelves full of dust-covered jars, and a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, swaying slightly and casting shadows that danced like mocking demons. Something metallic and sweet floated in the air, a stench that turned my stomach, evoking images of blood and decay. I heard footsteps on the wooden stairs above, heavy creaks that echoed like thunder in my skull. The door opened with a rusty groan, and the two men from the car entered. The tall one, the one with the scar on his eyebrow, walked with a feline arrogance, smiling strangely, as if sharing a private joke with the universe. The stocky one followed him, his steps deliberate, staring at me with an intensity that froze the blood in my veins. "Looks like the princess woke up," said the tall one, his voice rough as gravel under boots. He approached, crouching down to inspect me as if I were a damaged package, and I shrunk back against the pipe, the metal scraping my back. "Where's Chloe?" I asked, my voice a hoarse croak, trying to sound firm, but betraying the terror gripping my chest. "What have you done with her? Is she okay?" The two men looked at each other, an exchange of glances that lasted a second too long, and then they burst out laughing. A hollow, cruel laugh that bounced off the concrete walls and dug into my bones like splinters. "Chloe is perfectly fine," said a familiar voice from the top of the stairs, calm, almost casual. My heart stopped, and then I saw her coming down, step by step, with a bottle of water in her hand, as if she were returning from a trip to the supermarket. She was wearing the same tight jeans she always wore, worn at the knees from climbing trees in our childhood, and the hoodie she had borrowed from me the week before, now stained with what looked like dried mud. But her face was unrecognizable. The girl I had grown up with, whose shoulder I had cried on when her father died of cancer when we were 15, with whom I had shared dreams of traveling to Europe together after graduation, now looked at me with an expression of utter indifference. No. It was worse. Satisfaction, as if she were contemplating a work of art she'd created herself. "Chloe," I whispered, my mind reeling, unable to process the image. The handcuffs clinked as I instinctively pulled at them. What's going on? Tell me this is a joke, please." She approached with measured steps, kneeling in front of me until her face was inches from mine. Her gaze swept over my chained body with a clinical, cold curiosity, like a surgeon evaluating a specimen. I could smell her usual perfume, vanilla and jasmine, now mixed with something acrid, like nervous sweat. "I'm sorry, Mel," she said, but there was no trace of regret in her voice, only mild annoyance, as if I were a minor inconvenience in her schedule. "We had a deal. I got you and they gave me my share." The words hung in the air, heavy and incomprehensible. "A deal," I repeated, stunned, my brain struggling to connect the dots. It was as if she were speaking a foreign language, one of betrayal and darkness that I couldn't decipher. "What deal? Chloe, please. We were friends, sisters. What the hell is wrong with you?" She let out a dramatic sigh, standing up and crossing her arms, as if I were a stubborn child explaining why she doesn't want to eat her vegetables. "That's what you thought. But friendships are transactions, Melissa. Nothing more. And you're worth a lot to certain people, people who like to collect pretty things like you." As she spoke, the man with the scar, Vince, I would later call him, approached from behind, running a hand through my tangled hair. The touch was possessive, invasive, and I instinctively recoiled, hitting my head against the pipe with a dull thud. The pain was sharp, a white flash behind my eyes, but it was nothing compared to the horror that was beginning to crystallize in my chest. Chloe hadn't been kidnapped with me. Chloe was part of this. My best friend, the person who had helped me study for exams, who had comforted me after my first heartbreak, had sold me like an object on the black market. The burly man, whom Chloe referred to as Leo in a casual tone as we climbed the stairs, unlocked my handcuffs from the pipe with a key he took from his pocket, but he didn't release me entirely. Instead, He put smaller handcuffs on me that joined my wrists in front of my body, the metal biting into my bruised skin. "To make you more manageable," he growled, his breath smelling of stale tobacco and old coffee as he pushed me forward. We climbed the creaky stairs, each step a reminder of my vulnerability, and emerged on the main floor of the cabin. It was slightly better than the basement. Wooden walls with peeling wallpaper, a fire crackling in a dirty fireplace, but not by much. The place was sparsely furnished, with a torn, dust-covered sofa, a wooden table, with dark stains that looked like rust or something worse, and threadbare curtains that filtered the twilight. The air was warmer here, but heavy with the smell of old cigarettes and damp, and every corner seemed to whisper secrets of past violence. Chloe flopped down on the sofa as if she owned the place, turning on an old television that picked up only static and gray snow, the buzz filling the uncomfortable silence. She acted with chilling normality, as if she hadn't just confessed her betrayal, as if she wasn't facilitating my captivity. I stood there, trembling, the handcuffs weighing like anchors on my arms. "Why, Chloe?" I asked, and the tears finally came, hot and salty, rolling down my dirty cheeks. "What did I do to deserve this? Tell me, please, so I can understand." She didn't even look up from the television. She just changed the channel with the remote control, the click-clack echoing in the room. "It's not personal, Mel. It's business. Besides, you were always a little naive, believing that the world was fair, that people were good by default." She shook her head, a gesture of fake pity. "Someone had to teach you the truth, and I guess it fell to me." Leo pushed me into a hard wooden chair next to the table, the back scratching my back through my thin t-shirt. Vince disappeared for a moment into a side room and returned with a cheap digital camera, the dirty lens reflecting the light from the fire. "Smile for the camera, beautiful," he said, his smile revealing yellow, uneven teeth as he plugged the cable into an old laptop on the table. He positioned himself in front of me, adjusting the focus with nicotine-stained fingers, and the test flash momentarily blinded me, leaving dancing spots in my vision. I tried to look into the lens, but my treacherous eyes conveyed pure terror, silently begging that my parents, when they saw this, would be able to read between the lines, see the panic in my dilated gaze. "Now tell Mom and Dad you're okay," Vince ordered, bringing the camera closer until his shadow fell over me. My throat closed up, but I forced the words out. "Dad, Mom," I began, my voice a broken thread, punctuated by sobs I couldn't contain. I'm in a place. I don't know where exactly. Chloe is here. She brought me. Please help me." A sharp blow to the side of my head interrupted me, a punch from Leo that made me see stars, the pain radiating like liquid fire through my skull. I fell sideways into the chair, the wood creaking under my weight, and the taste of blood flooded my mouth where I had bitten my tongue. "We already know the litany," Vince shouted, his face red with irritation, snatching control of the recording. "Say you're fine, and that they need to pay if they want to see you again. No drama, or we'll shut you up another way." Between muffled sobs, I repeated the words they dictated to me, each syllable a bitter surrender, a betrayal of my own truth. "I'm fine. Pay the ransom and let me go. Please." When they finished, the click of the stop button felt like a hammer to my temple, and Chloe rose from the sofa with feline grace, approaching to inspect the video on the laptop screen. "Not bad," she murmured, rewinding the part where I was crying. "Pathetic enough to make them pay up fast." She leaned toward me then, her warm breath on my bruised ear. "You know, Mel," she said in a conversational tone as if we were gossiping about boys at the cafe again, "it always made me angry how close you were to your parents. Always so perfect. The picture-perfect family with Sunday dinners and hugs." Her smile twisted into something ugly, venomous. "I wonder how they'll feel when they get the video. If they ever get it, that is." I looked at her, blinking through my tears, my mind stuck on her words. "What do you mean? They won't send it?" She straightened up, shrugging indifferently. "That money is the least of it. This was always about something else, about evening the score, about making you pay for being you. Those words dug into me deeper than any blow, a poison spreading through my veins. This wasn't just a kidnapping for ransom. There was something darker, something personal buried in the folds of our friendship that I had never seen, a resentment that Chloe had quietly nurtured for years. That night, after forcing me to eat a stale sandwich with moldy ham, "Eat, or we'll make you," Leo growled. They locked me back in the basement. The stairs seemed endless going down, each step an echo of my defeat, and when the door slammed shut with a metallic clang, darkness enveloped me like a suffocating blanket. The handcuffs clicked back onto the pipe, cold and unforgiving, and I curled up on the mattress, the smell of old urine and sweat permeating everything. The hours dragged on, heavy and dark, marked only by the distant ticking of a clock upstairs, and the sounds of the cabin settling, creaking wood, the distant hooting of an owl in the forest, muffled laughter coming from the room where they drank and planned. I tried not to move so as not to worsen the marks on my wrists, but my bladder betrayed me. There was no bathroom, only a rusty bucket in the corner that smelled of desperation, and when I finally couldn't hold it any longer, I urinated on myself, the warm wetness spreading through my jeans, the cold of the cement seeping into my bones like icy fingers. The worst part wasn't the physical discomfort, even though the cold made me shiver uncontrollably and the pain in my head pounded like a war drum. It was the betrayal, an acid that corroded my mind relentlessly. I stayed there, in the darkness, replaying every moment of our friendship like a detective obsessed with a false lead. I remembered the days at the beach in our childhood, building sandcastles that the sea washed away at dawn, laughing until our stomachs hurt. The sleepovers at her house, whispering secrets about crushes and fears under the sheets with a flashlight, promising each other we would always be together. The time her father died, and I stayed with her for 3 whole days, holding her hand as she cried herself hoarse, swearing that her remaining family was mine. Had it all been a lie? How long had Chloe been planning this, feigning laughter as she wove her web? The person I thought I knew better than anyone else in the world was a stranger. A monster with the familiar face of my best friend, and that revelation tore me apart inside, leaving a void that panic filled with horrible visions. How long would this last? Would they kill me? Or worse, would they break me until I wished for death? The mental deterioration began that first night, subtle at first, like a crack in a dam. The Melissa of before, the strong, confident student with dreams of writing novels and traveling, began to fade, replaced by a frightened, trembling creature chained in darkness, betrayed by the light she trusted most. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Chloe's face coming down the stairs, her satisfied smile, and I woke up gasping, my heart racing. At dawn, or what I assumed was dawn since there were no windows, the footsteps returned, and Chloe came down alone with a bowl of cold oatmeal. "Eat," she ordered, placing the bowl on the floor at a distance that forced me to stretch as far as my handcuffs would allow. She watched me as I chewed the tasteless lumps, her eyes scrutinizing. "You don't look so bad," she commented, as if we were evaluating a new hairstyle. "You could last a while if you cooperate." I tried to ignore her, focusing on swallowing, but she didn't leave. She sat on the edge of the mattress, crossing her legs, and started talking as if we were confidants again. "You know, I always envied how easy you had it. Your parents, your intelligence, the boys who looked at you first." Her voice was light, but there was an edge to it. I asked her why she hadn't told me, why we hadn't been able to work it out as friends, but she just laughed, a dry sound. Friends. What a silly word. Then she got up abruptly and left, leaving the empty plate and a silence that weighed heavier than chains. That was the first sign that her visits would not be just to feed me. They would be to torture me, to dig up resentments I didn't even know existed. The days melted into a gray haze of terror and pain, time marked only by the cruel routines of my captors. In the mornings, Leo would come down with water in a rusty jug, pour it into a filthy glass, and watch me drink as if I were a caged animal. Drink fast, he would growl if I took too long, and once, when I spat out a sip because of the metallic taste, he slapped me so hard that my cheek was swollen for hours. Vince was the one who recorded the progress videos, as he called them, forcing me to repeat increasingly degrading phrases. "I'm fine," "They'll pay soon," or "Chloe is my friend. It's all a misunderstanding." Each flash of the camera was a stab in the heart, reminding me of my helplessness. And afterwards, I was sent back to the basement with fresh bruises if I didn't smile enough. Chloe often came down to see me, bringing food, cans of cold soup that she opened with a blunt can opener, stale cookies that crumbled into crumbs, or just to talk. And her conversations were torture in themselves, a parade of twisted memories that rewrote our history. One afternoon, maybe the third or fourth day, she came down with a red apple that she bit into before offering me the rest, juice dripping down her chin. She sat on the mattress, too close, and began, "Remember when we were 14 and you liked Matt Henderson, the quarterback with that dental-ad smile?" I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Matt had been my first awkward kiss at a school party, a sweet moment I treasured. "I liked him too," Chloe continued, her voice sweet as distilled poison. "But he only had eyes for you. Always you, as if I were invisible." I said nothing. I knew from growing experience that any response could ignite her anger. "He wrote me a love letter, you know? I found it in his locker. I tore it to shreds and told him you thought he was a total idiot, a loser on steroids." She smiled, relishing the memory as if it were a victory. "He cried in the boys' bathroom. It was pathetic to see him break down over you." Each anecdote was a dagger aimed at the heart of my self-esteem. It revealed an alternate version of our friendship, one where she was the eternal victim and I was the unwitting villain. Where every achievement of mine, my acceptance into college with a scholarship, my first job as a tutor, was a veiled insult to her. Every moment of my happiness a blatant theft of hers. "You're quinceañero," she murmured again, this time with eyes glazed over, not with sadness, but with contained rage. "You invited the whole class. We danced until dawn, and my mother wouldn't even let me go because she had to work. You had the perfect dress, the 3-tier cake, and I stayed home watching reruns of soap operas." I tried to comfort her, whispering, "I'm sorry, Chloe. I didn't know it hurt you so much." But she turned to me with a sharp movement, her blue eyes now cold in empty wells. "I don't want your pity," she shouted, and her fist connected with my side in a sharp blow that knocked the wind out of me. The air escaping from my lungs like a deflating balloon. The pain spread, a fire that curled me into a fetal position, but she didn't stop there. She got up and started kicking the mattress, then the cement walls, in a fit of uncontrollable rage that echoed in the confined basement. She screamed incoherently, "Always you, perfect Melissa, stealing everything from me," cursing my name, my family, our supposed friendship, as if it were a prison I had imposed on her. The kicks grazed my leg once, sending a wave of panic through me. But she didn't touch me again. It was as if her fury needed a bigger target, the space itself. Finally, exhausted, panting, she stopped and smoothed her hair with trembling hands, like an actress leaving the stage. "You're lucky they need you in good shape for the videos," she said, her voice regaining that eerie calm that terrified me more than the screams. "For now, get some sleep. Tomorrow will be another day of lessons." When she left, climbing the stairs with firm steps, I was left trembling on the floor, my side throbbing with pain, silent tears wetting the mattress. I was trapped not only with my physical captors, but with someone who hated me with a visceral intensity, a hatred that had fermented silently for years under the mask of friendship. And the worst part was that I didn't fully understand why. I had been her friend. I had loved her unconditionally. I had defended her to everyone, even when her impulsive decisions got her into trouble. Was it envy? Accumulated jealousy? Each revelation opened a new wound, and in the nights that followed, when silence closed in, my mind spiraled. How many times had I laughed with her knowing, in retrospect, that she was planning this? Were there signs I ignored, like her sudden silences or unexplained absences? Vince and Leo were brutal, but their violence was transactional, almost professional. They beat me to ensure obedience, to record videos without interruption, to remind me of my place in the cabin hierarchy. One morning, Leo dragged me upstairs for exercise, as he called it, walking in circles around the room under his watchful eye, the handcuffs clinking like ghost chains. If I stopped, a push in the back would make me stumble. Vince, for his part, enjoyed casual interrogations while he ate. "How much do you think your old folks will pay?" 50,000, 100, laughing when I didn't answer, and once frustrated by my silence, pinching my arm until it left a purple bruise. But Chloe's violence was different, emotional and personal, an assault on the soul. Every word was a scalpel, every distorted memory a poison injected directly into my veins. It was designed to destroy me from within, to rewrite our shared history and make me the scapegoat for all her failures, real or imagined. One night, perhaps a week after the kidnapping, time had become elastic, stretching out in agony. Chloe had one of her most intense outbursts. She came downstairs furious, accusing me of stealing her place on the high school debate team, an event I remembered as an opportunity she turned down out of laziness. "You wanted it more," I shouted in defense, a mistake that unleashed her storm. She slapped me, the sound echoing like a gunshot, and then forced me to my knees, pulling my hair until fresh tears sprang forth. "Admit it," she hissed. "Admit that you ruined my life." I repeated her words like a broken mantra, just to make her stop. And when she finally calmed down, she left me there, sobbing. Hours later, when the light bulb blew from a short circuit, a common occurrence in the old cabin, Vince came down alone, the stench of cheap alcohol preceding him like a toxic cloud. "The girl's a little crazy, huh?" he said, chuckling to himself as he sat heavily on the floor in front of me, the whiskey bottle swaying in his hand. The darkness was almost total, only a faint glow from above seeping through the half-open door. He was drunk, his words slurred, and for the first time I saw a crack in his armor, vulnerability in a man who prided himself on control. But she pays well, very well. Chloe came to us with the whole plan. You as the jackpot. I seized the moment, my voice shaky but calculated. What exactly does she want with me? Just the money?" He shrugged, taking a long swig that made him cough. "At first it was the ransom. Your parents are the type to pay without question, but now it's more like a hobby for her. She says you have a debt to pay, a debt of friendship, or something poetic like that." He drank again, the liquid sloshing around, and I stared at the bottle, a desperate idea forming in my terrified mind. I needed information, anything to survive. Could I have some? I asked, trying to sound submissive, weak, looking down as I had learned they liked. "I'm cold, and my throat hurts." Vince looked at me, his eyes clouded by alcohol, surprised, then smiled slowly, a crack in his smile revealing the gap of a missing tooth. "Sure, princess. Why not? One sip won't kill you." He staggered closer, the bottle tilting toward my lips, and I swallowed the burning liquid that went down my esophagus like fire, holding back the nausea and cough that threatened to betray me. The bourbon was cheap, harsh, but it warmed my frozen chest. Vince stayed longer than usual that night, talking drunkenly and confidentially about his life, petty thefts that landed him in jail for a year, an ex who left him for a cop, how Chloe contacted him through a seedy bar in the city, mentioning a friend with ego problems. It wasn't crucial information, vague names, imprecise locations, but it was something, fragments of a puzzle I could piece together in the dark. Each piece of information was a brick in the wall of my resistance. As he rambled, I noticed key details. He didn't lock the basement door when he went down alone. He just pushed it until the latch clicked, a sound I could imitate. Vince's phone, an old model with a cracked screen, was sometimes left on the table upstairs, charging. And Chloe, in her arrogance, underestimated the basement as a prison. Once, she left a hairpin on the floor after combing her hair, a mistake I picked up with my feet and hid under the mattress. A plan began to form in my mind, weak and fragile as a silk thread in the dark. Gain their trust, feign breakdown, wait for the moment. I would have to be patient, observe their routines. Vince drank on Fridays. Leo checked the handcuffs at 8 a.m. And I would have to be willing to do anything, to become anything, to survive. That night, after Vince staggered upstairs, I practiced silently, twisting my wrist in the handcuffs, feeling the metal loosen a millimeter, ignoring the pain that promised blisters. Weeks turned into a month, then almost 2, a blur of raw survival. My body was a map of blossoming bruises and superficial cuts. One on my knee from an accidental fall during exercise, another on my lip from Vince hitting me for not smiling in a video. I had learned to eat what they gave me without complaining. Watery soup with bits of indeterminate meat, stale bread that I chewed until it lost its flavor, dirty water that Leo brought in an unwashed jug. I endured the confession sessions where Chloe forced me to admit imaginary crimes against our friendship. Say it. You stole my boyfriend in 10th grade. Repeating her lies until my voice cracked, just to make her stop. Once, during one of those sessions, she forced me to write an apology letter on crumpled paper with a chewed-up pencil, detailing how I had betrayed her my whole life. She read it aloud, laughing, and then burned it in the upstairs fireplace, the ashes floating like my dissipated hopes. But inside, something was changing, solidifying into a cold, stubborn determination that surprised even me. I no longer cried when they hit me. I bit the inside of my cheek until it bled to maintain my composure. I no longer begged for mercy. Instead, I observed how Vince limped slightly from an old leg injury, how Leo avoided bright light because his eyes hurt, how Chloe got nervous when I mentioned her mother, a topic that made her shut down abruptly. Her hatred for me blinded her. She was so focused on my destruction that she underestimated my ability to adapt, to become a chameleon. One night, during another of Vince's drunken binges, I asked him about past escapes. Has anyone ever left here? And he laughed confidently. None as smart as you, but they all end up breaking down. His words gave me ammunition. The back door creaked on the 3rd step. The forest was dense, but with a path to the east. Tension escalated at unexpected moments. One afternoon, Chloe came downstairs with a kitchen knife. For peeling apples, she said, but she waved it close to my face while talking about how I could end this now if I wanted to. My pulse quickened, the metal reflecting the light bulb, and I feigned utter terror, sobbing until she got bored and put it away. Another day, Leo took me upstairs for a bath, cold water in a bucket, scrubbing me with a rough cloth while Vince watched. And the icy water took my breath away, but I took the opportunity to notice the key to the front door padlock hanging on a hook in the kitchen. I attempted a first minor escape that week. I loosened the handcuffs enough to reach the hidden hairpin and work it into the lock on the pipe, but the metal squeaked, alerting Leo upstairs. He ran down, punched me in the ribs until I saw black, and tightened the handcuffs. Try that again, and I'll cut your fingers off, he hissed. He left me there, gasping for breath, but the failure didn't break me. It hardened me, taught me to be more stealthy. From that incident on, I began to play a more elaborate role. I became what they wanted, submissive, defeated, even admiring of their power. I asked Chloe for advice on little things. How do you handle stress so well? Nodding with downcast eyes as she strutted. With Vince, I commented on his cunning in his plans. You're so smart at this. And he drank more, confiding fragments. The name of the bar where he met Chloe, the Black Raven. I even got Leo to give me an extra blanket on a cold night, feigning uncontrollable shivering and murmuring, "Thank you, you're kind," words that disconcerted him enough to comply. The physical situation didn't improve. The abuse continued, a punch here, a hair pull there. But now it had a different tone. Reaffirmation of dominance over someone who, they believed, had finally broken. In their arrogance, they became careless. They left the basement door ajar when Chloe was alone with me, confident in my tamed spirit. Vince forgot his knife after cutting the temporary rope for the videos. Leo stopped checking my handcuffs with the same vigor, his thick fingers loosening them unintentionally. I was playing a deadly game, betting my life that I could fake my own defeat with enough conviction to lower their guard. Every forced smile, teeth clenched behind swollen lips, every submissive word, "Yes, you're right," was a calculated step toward possible freedom. And every night, when the snoring echoed upstairs, I practiced in the dark, slipping out of the handcuffs with the hairpin, twisting until the skin bled, moving silently through the basement, memorizing where the boards creaked, opening the door without the telltale click, smearing saliva on the hinges. The smell of mold had become the scent of my determination. The darkness no longer just a prison, but a training ground. And the person I was becoming, this cunning, patient, manipulative creature, frightened me as much as my captors. Because I knew that if I got out of there, a part of that shadow would stay with me, forever changing the way I saw the world. Tension peaked during unpredictable interactions. One morning, Chloe decided to play truth or dare. She tied my hands to the chair above and asked me questions about our past, rewarding honest answers with a sip of water, punishing lies with pinches on my arms. "Tell me, did you ever feel sorry for me?" she asked, her nails digging in. I lied, saying yes always, and she laughed, letting me go. But then, in a twist, she forced me to look at photos on her phone, images of us as girls, smiling, and delete them one by one. "Goodbye to lies," she said, and every tap on the screen was a stab. Again, Vince organized a dinner upstairs. I was seated at the table with them, handcuffed, eating sour stew while they planned the next payment. Chloe flirted openly with Vince, her hand on his thigh, and I looked away, my stomach churning not just from the food. "Eat, or no dessert," Leo joked, and when I refused, he forced the spoon into my mouth, the broth spilling down my chin. A failed escape attempt almost cost me everything. 2 months in, during a minor storm, I loosened the handcuffs while Chloe dozed upstairs. She'd come down to scream about an imaginary theft of a necklace at college. I crawled to the door, my heart pounding, but the thunder poorly masked my ragged breathing, and she woke up. "What are you doing?" she screamed, lunging at me. She dragged me back by my hair, tearing out strands, and called the men. The punishment was brutal. Vince whipped my legs with his belt until the skin broke. Leo handcuffed me so tightly that my fingers went numb for days. Chloe just watched, smoking a cigarette, and whispered, "Next time, I'll let you bleed." I cried that night, not because of the physical pain, but because of how close I had been, and because of the fear that my determination would falter. But at dawn, my body burning, I vowed to continue. Leo's extra blanket became my makeshift pillow, the hairpin my talisman. Finally, one afternoon nearly 2.5 months later, Chloe came downstairs with Vince's phone, her face tense. "Time for another video," she announced, connecting it to the camera. "Your parents are getting restless. The last payment was short. They say they need proof." While Vince set up the equipment, makeshift flashlight lights, a script scribbled on paper, I looked directly at Chloe, my voice surprisingly steady despite the lump in my throat. "You're right," I said, holding her gaze defiantly. She blinked, bewildered, the phone dangling in her hand. "About what?" "About everything," I continued, injecting feigned defeat into my words. "I was naive. I didn't see what you really were, the power you have, but now I see it. You're stronger than me. You always were, and I'm sorry I didn't recognize it sooner. It was a disgusting lie, every syllable tasting of bile and self-imposed betrayal, but I saw her eyes light up with a flash of narcissistic satisfaction, her posture straightening. Flattery was the only language she seemed to understand, the balm for her wounded ego. "Of course I am," she said, puffing herself up slightly, a blush of pleasure on her cheeks. "You finally admit it. Maybe you're not so useless after all." The video turned out perfectly for them. Me, with downcast eyes and a broken voice, repeating the script without resistance, even adding a "Chloe takes good care of me" that made her smile. From that day on, the change was palpable. My interactions became a theater of submission. I asked Chloe about her vision for the future. What will you do with the money? Listening to her vague dreams of escaping to a big city. With Vince, I shared false anecdotes of my repentance, and he responded with pats on the back that hurt less. Leo, the most stoic, began to let me walk without pushing me, muttering "good girl" once. The guard let down, doors left open longer, handcuffs loosened. Even one night when Chloe left me upstairs watching static on the TV while she went out for a smoke. But the tension never completely disappeared. One night, Vince drank too much and got touchy-feely, his hands on my shoulders, as he babbled about tests of loyalty. Chloe pushed him away, laughing, but her eyes on me were possessive, jealous. "She's mine to break," she said, and pulled me downstairs. Another day, a noise outside, a distant car perhaps, made them paranoid. They tied me up extra tight, and Vince threatened to cut and run if the police approached. Fear spread, but so did hope. Had my parents alerted someone? I practiced more. The hairpin now opened the pipe in minutes. My wrist bled but healed quickly. The forest, from the high windows, had a stream to the north. If I escaped, following it would lead me to a road. The thunderstorm came like an omen, roaring outside the cabin exactly 3 months after the kidnapping. Rain lashed the wooden walls like bullets. Thunder rumbled, shaking the ground and causing the lights to flicker on and off. It was a perfect night for chaos. The din would mask any sound. The wind would howl over footsteps. Nearly 3 months of hell had passed, my body at its limit, bones protruding beneath pale skin, bruises fading into new ones. But my mind was a razor's edge. That night, Chloe had been particularly volatile, coming down to the basement to vent about a recent theft. How I had supposedly stolen the spotlight from her in a school play, a memory she twisted until it sounded like personal genocide. She spent hours monologuing, her voice rising and falling like a siren, until exhausted by her own rage. She collapsed into the old chair they had brought down weeks earlier for their sessions. "You're a lost cause, Melissa," she muttered, rubbing her eyes with the back of her hand. "A total lost cause." I didn't respond. I lay still on my mattress, feigning the defeated submission they love to see, my breathing slow and measured. Gradually, her head fell forward, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. She had fallen asleep, the cigarette still unlit between her fingers. My heart was beating so hard I feared it would give me away. A dull drum in my ears, but the storm drowned everything out. This was my chance. Her exhaustion, the relaxation of vigilance after months of my convincing charade, the climatic hell that erased all traces. With slow, deliberate movements, which I had practiced countless times in secret in the stillness of the early morning, I slipped out from under the dirty blankets, the mattress barely creaking. The old handcuffs that Leo had stopped checking carefully were loose enough, thanks to weeks of subtle twisting and blood as lubricant, that with a painful twist of my wrist that drew a muffled groan, I was able to free my left hand. The metal scraped raw flesh, warm blood dripping, but it was a familiar sensation, almost welcome in its promise of movement. I stood up, my legs trembling from atrophy and malnutrition, muscles protesting like rusty cables. Each step was a sharp agony in my knees, a reminder of the accumulated falls and blows, but each one brought me closer to the door, to the freedom I had visualized in feverish dreams. I looked at Chloe, asleep in the chair. Her face softened in sleep like the girl I remembered. Part of me, The old Melissa, buried under layers of trauma, wanted to wake her up, confront her with a choked cry. Why do you hate me so much? Make her understand the monster she had become, perhaps even drag her with me to redemption. But the cunning creature I had become knew better. She was the greater danger, the architect of this nightmare, the one who had mapped out every step of my downfall. One cry from her, and it would all end in blood. I crossed the concrete floor, avoiding the loose boards I knew would creak, the third and seventh from the wall, my bare feet silent on the cold. The basement door was ajar, as it had been more often lately, a carelessness born of her confidence in my breakdown. I pushed slowly, holding my breath until my lungs burned, waiting for the treacherous squeak of the rusty hinges. Only a faint whisper, lost in the roar of another thunderclap that made the walls vibrate. Upstairs, the cabin was relatively quiet, broken only by Vince's guttural snoring from a bedroom and the incessant pounding of rain on the roof. It smelled of stubbed-out cigarettes and spilled alcohol, a stench I now associated with opportunity. I saw the front door at the far end of the room, 15 feet away, freedom tangible, pulsing. But then my gaze fell on the coffee table. Vince's phone, low on battery but still on, forgotten there after a message he had sent earlier. My pulse quickened. My own phone had been smashed on the first day, trampled by Leo before my eyes. This was a lifeline, a thread to the outside world. Call 911, send a location if the GPS worked. I slid toward the table like a shadow, the treacherous wooden floor beneath my feet, every muscle tense with the effort of silence. My fingers, trembling and sticky with blood, closed around the cold plastic of the phone, hiding it under my dirty shirt, against my feverish skin. Just then, a light came on in the hallway, a yellow glow that cut through the darkness like a knife. What the hell are you doing? It was Leo, standing in the doorway of the makeshift bathroom, a corner with a portable toilet, staring at me with sleepy eyes that quickly cleared, his massive silhouette blocking the exit. Panic froze me for an eternal second, but I didn't think. The creature inside me took control, instincts sharpened by months of survival. I grabbed an empty whiskey bottle from the table, the heavy glass, the sticky neck, and with a strength born of desperation I didn't know I had, I threw it at his head. He narrowly dodged it, fighter's instinct, and the bottle smashed into the wall behind him, shattering into 1,000 pieces that rained down like lethal confetti. The crash, glass breaking, echoing off the wood, awakened Vince, who staggered out of the room, gun in hand, and Chloe, whose hurried footsteps echoed on the basement stairs like gunshots. "He's getting away," Leo shouted, lunging at me with outstretched arms, his weight making the floor shake. I dodged his grasp by millimeters, spinning toward the front door, the phone slipping under my shirt but secure. My clumsy fingers fumbled with the rusty lock, the metal jammed by years of neglect, resisting as if conspiring with them. "Open up, damn it," I whispered, panic scratching at my throat, but the lock creaked without yielding. Vince caught up with me then, his arms like pincers wrapping around my torso from behind, squeezing the air out of my lungs. "I thought you'd learned your lesson, bitch," he growled in my ear, his breath reeking of sleep and alcohol, squeezing until I felt my ribs crack. Chloe appeared at the basement entrance, her face contorted with pure primitive rage, her tousled hair framing her bulging eyes. "Kill her!" she screamed, her voice piercing the storm like a knife. "We don't need her anymore. Finish her off now." In that moment of utter chaos, Vince holding me down, Leo closing in with clenched fists, Chloe screaming death threats like a banshee. I knew I had lost. I'd come so close, the breath of freedom on my neck, but the treacherous bolt and their bodies crushed me. Tears of frustration burned my eyes, the phone pressed against my abdomen like a useless secret. But then, above the sound of the furious rain and the screams, I heard another sound, distant at first, a low wail, then growing louder, insistent. Sirens, wailing close, cutting through the night like rays of justice. The world seemed to pause in a collective heartbeat. Vince loosened his grip for a split second, his head turning toward the window, disbelief etched on his face. "The cops," he muttered, his voice breaking. Leo froze, mid-step, his eyes fixed on the darkness outside, the color draining from his face. Chloe stopped screaming abruptly, her mouth open in a mask of utter disbelief, as if the universe had betrayed her. The red and blue lights began to swirl, filtering through the broken shutters of the cabin, painting the room in hypnotic flashes of hope and vindication, the cold blue mingling with the blood red. "The police," I murmured to myself. And it was the sweetest, most redeeming word I had uttered in months, a balm to my shattered soul. Chaos erupted inside the cabin like a grenade. Vince cursed profusely. Shit, how did they know? And released my torso, running toward the back door with the gun still in his hand, tripping over a chair in his haste. Leo followed him, his bulk turning to clumsiness, knocking over a lamp that crashed to the floor. Chloe stood still for an eternal moment, staring intently into my eyes, her cold, resigned rage transforming into something deeper, more sinister, eternal hatred. "They won't save you from me, Melissa," she said, her voice a whisper that managed to pierce the din outside, low and venomous as a promise. "They never will. This doesn't end here." Then she turned with spectral grace and disappeared into the darkness of the basement, her footsteps light as smoke. Minutes later, or perhaps seconds, time stretched by adrenaline, the front door came crashing down with an explosion of splintered wood and twisted metal. The police battering ram bursting in like an enraged bull. Men in bulletproof vests and semi-automatic weapons stormed into the room, shouting orders that echoed over the storm. "Hands up, get down! Police, don't move!" The cabin was filled with blinding flashlight beams, authoritative voices multiplying, boots trampling on broken glass. One officer, tall with a gray mustache and kind eyes, approached me first, his weapon lowering when he saw my condition, handcuffed, bleeding, shaking. "Miss, are you okay? I'm Officer Ramirez. We're here to help you." I collapsed then, my knees giving way like wet paper, the world spinning in a vortex of relief and shock. His arms caught me, not violent but secure, protective, an overwhelming contrast to Vince's grip. A thermal blanket appeared around my shoulders, rough but warm, and soft voices reassured me. "Breathe. You're safe now. It's all over." As they carried me to an ambulance parked in the muddy clearing, paramedics wrapping me in bandages and injecting me with painkillers, I watched Vince and Leo being handcuffed in front of the cabin. They struggled and cursed. Vince spitting insults, Leo muttering threats, but helicopters and lights immobilized them, their defeated figures dragged to patrol cars. I scanned the officers, the wind-lashed trees, searching for Chloe's face, her fleeting silhouette. She was gone. She had disappeared into the storm that night, like a ghost dissolving in the rain, her promise hanging in the air like fog. The subsequent interrogations were a whirlwind of fluorescent lights and gentle but insistent questions at a nearby police station. Detectives with notepads asked me for details, descriptions, routines, Chloe's role, and I talked until I was hoarse. Vince's phone, still in my shirt, handed over as evidence, its battery dead, but the last partial message confirming an approximate location. My parents arrived that same night, aged 10 years, in 3 months of agony, my mother sobbing into my neck, my father clutching my hand with trembling fingers. "We never gave up, honey," he whispered. They had exhausted their savings on private investigators, pressured the police with daily calls, and an anonymous tip, a sighting of a black SUV in a rural area reported by a farmer, combined with their relentless tenacity, had traced the path to the cabin. Vince and Leo were quickly charged, aggravated kidnapping, assault, extortion, a litany of charges that would bury them for decades. The cabin, registered under a false alias, was a place known in dark circles for illegal operations, with evidence of previous victims in the basement, stains on the cement, empty bottles of chloroform. But Chloe, there was no trace of her. She vanished that night like smoke, The police chasing false leads. A bus ticket to another city purchased with cash. A call from a burner phone to an unknown contact. They searched for her exhaustively. Amber alerts, wanted lists, raids on bars like El Cuervo Negro. But she seemed to have evaporated, a ghost in the system. Some agents speculated that she had an escape plan prepared in advance. Accomplices waiting in the woods. Others, that she got lost in the storm and succumbed to the cold and torrential rain. But I know the truth, deep in my bones. Chloe is alive. I can feel it. A cold intuition that wakes me in night sweats. The same intuition that failed me in seeing her betrayal, now sharpened by survival. She's out there, somewhere shadowy, rebuilding her life with false identities, feeding her resentment like a slow fire, waiting for the moment to return. My physical recovery was slow, a mosaic of doctor's appointments and physical therapy. Broken ribs healed with time and casts. Infected cuts treated with antibiotics that made me nauseous. But the weight I lost, 15 pounds in 3 months, took time to regain. My reflection in the mirror, still bony and marked by white scars. The mental, that's a bottomless abyss, a wound that festers in silence. I have recurring nightmares. Chloe coming down the stairs with a smile, Vince whispering in the dark, the lock jammed as sirens approach but never arrive. Panic attacks assail me in supermarkets. Too many people, the smell of mold. And I distrust everyone. New friends who laugh too much, strangers who look a second too long. Weekly therapy forces me to unearth memories to name the trauma, but words cannot capture the terror, the betrayal that redefines me. The Melissa of before died in that decrepit basement, drowned in darkness and lies. The one who came out is stronger, tougher, with eyes that scan every room for exits and a voice that doesn't tremble in confrontations. But she is also broken in an irreparable way, cracks that let in cold drafts of doubt. I have returned to college, part-time, studying criminology now instead of literature, channeling the horror into knowledge. My parents pamper me, but I see the cost on their faces. Insomnia, discussions about moving to a safer place, and always, deep in my mind, lives the echo of her last words. They won't save you from me. It's a promise that haunts me in my dreams. A reminder that the real prison wasn't the basement, but the false friendship that chained me. But it's also fuel. I live vigilantly with the fork, a duplicate I keep in my pocket as a talisman, waiting not for Chloe's return, but for the strength to face her if she comes. Because I learned one thing in that cabin. Survival isn't just about escaping. It's about transforming yourself into something even your monsters don't recognize. I never liked the idea of changing therapists. Over the years, I learned that talking to someone new always meant starting from scratch, telling the story again, dusting off old wounds, adjusting my words to sound sane and reasonable, even when the reason I was there was precisely to not be. But that afternoon, as I left work, my old psychologist had canceled due to medical leave, and the replacement recommended by the clinic was a certain Dr. Keller with an office on the outskirts of town. It didn't seem strange to me. The receptionist spoke well of him. He sounded friendly, professional. A little eccentric, but very committed. I had no reason to suspect anything. The building was discreet, an old Victorian house converted into offices. Outside, the trees swayed under a gray sky, and the wooden sign with gold lettering simply read, Dr. A. Keller, Psychotherapy. There was no doorbell or receptionist, just a half-open door with a sign that said, Please come in. It struck me as personalized attention, something intimate. It wasn't unusual for professionals to work without a secretary. As I entered, I was greeted by a faint scent of wood and lavender. The walls were covered with minimalist paintings, black shapes on a white background, and a floor lamp cast a warm light on a beige rug. He was standing there, waiting for me. He smiled. He was a man in his 40s, tall, slim, with his hair carefully combed back. His voice was low, soft, modulated like that of a narrator who knows exactly the weight of each word. "Welcome. You can leave your things there, if you like." He pointed to a coat rack by the door. I thanked him, hung up my coat, and sat down in the armchair opposite his. He watched me closely, but without aggression, with an analytical curiosity that in any other context would have been flattering. There was something about the way he looked at me, direct, sustained, but without blinking too much, that conveyed absolute control of the space. "So," he said, folding his hands over his notebook, "would you like to tell me why you're here?" I told him the basics: anxiety, insomnia, the recent divorce, lack of concentration. Nothing I hadn't told anyone before. He listened with his body still, leaning forward slightly when I said something that interested him. He asked precise, surgical questions. I felt understood, even accompanied. Every time I finished a sentence, he would add something like, "That makes sense," or "You're more aware than you think." His tone was almost hypnotic. For the first half hour, everything was normal, until I noticed something insignificant. There was no clock in the room, no wall clock, no digital clock, not even a wristwatch on his wrist. I didn't know why that bothered me. I noticed it when he asked me to close my eyes and take a deep breath for exactly 1 minute. I couldn't measure that minute. I couldn't tell if a minute or 10 minutes had passed. When I opened my eyes, he was smiling with satisfaction, as if he had just confirmed something. "Good. You did very well." He wrote something down. "Tell me, how did you feel while you were breathing?" I answered what was expected, relaxed, calm. I lied. In reality, I had felt a growing discomfort, a kind of temporary imbalance. I wanted to check the time on my phone, but he interrupted me. "If you can, avoid looking at screens during the session. Blue light interferes with self-perception." I nodded. I was nervous for no reason. I didn't want to seem paranoid. But when my eyes scanned the room again, I noticed another detail. The door had no handle on the inside, just a smooth metal plate. At first, I thought it was a construction error. Sometimes in old buildings, handles break. I thought about saying something, but I didn't. I convinced myself that the exit was secure. All he had to do was let me out. Besides, why dramatize? It was the first session. The conversation continued, and little by little he began to talk more than I did. "People don't come here to talk," he said at one point, "but to be heard in a way that's not possible in real life. What we do is create a controlled space, an environment where the outside doesn't exist." The way he said, "where the outside doesn't exist," sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to smile, to go with the flow, but my breathing quickened. He noticed, and smiled too. "Relax. It's normal to feel resistance. There's always a part of us that wants to escape before the real healing begins." I sat up a little. "Excuse me?" The mind fights against control. His eyes were fixed on me. But control is necessary for healing. There was a silence. The sound of the rain outside grew louder, as if the house were sinking under a blanket of noise. I realized that the isolation was absolute. No car noises, no voices, no footsteps. I tried to remember if I had seen other offices or if that house had neighbors. I couldn't remember. "How long does the session last?" I asked. He looked at his notebook, but not to check the time. "The time depends on you. The actual length of a session cannot be measured in minutes, only in depth." I tensed up. I'd rather know the time. "Why?" he asked with genuine curiosity. "Are you in a hurry to leave?" I didn't know how to respond. His voice wasn't threatening, but there was something in his tone that brooked no argument. It was as if he had switched from therapist to interrogator without me noticing. "No, I just have to pick something up later," I improvised. "Ah, routines, commitments." He nodded slowly. "It's interesting how much we cling to them, even when they're not good for us." The silence that followed was unbearable. I got up. "Excuse me, I need to use the restroom." He nodded without moving. I headed for the door. When I put my hand on the metal plate, it didn't budge. The door didn't move. I turned around. "There's no handle," I said, trying to laugh. "I know." His response was calm, almost friendly. "It's to avoid distractions. No one leaves during sessions." "But I need to leave." My voice trembled more than I wanted it to. "Of course you do. We all need to escape when the cure starts to take effect." He took a step toward me. Not a big step, but enough for the air in the room to change density. I could smell his perfume. Something woody, almost chemical. My hands became clammy. "Could you open it, please?" I said, my voice a whisper. "Not yet," he said calmly. "You're not ready yet." I stood still. I didn't know whether to scream or laugh. I thought maybe it was a psychological test, a control experiment. Therapists use weird techniques, right? I thought that to calm myself down, but his gaze told me otherwise. It wasn't an experiment. It was a decision. I backed away to the armchair. He sat back down too, crossed his legs, and looked at me with the serenity of someone who has everything under control. "Sit down. We still have work to do." And then I understood. There was no mistake, no metaphor, no therapeutic technique. I was locked in. I don't remember how long it took before. I stopped asking him to open the door. Maybe an hour, maybe more. At some point, my voice broke, and I stopped insisting. He didn't yell. He didn't get upset. He just waited. That was his form of control, not punishment, but absolute patience, the calm of someone who knows that time is on their side. When I finally sat back down, he smiled, satisfied. "Good. You're learning to give in. That's the first step." I said nothing. I stared at the floor, trying to collect my thoughts. Every fiber of my being screamed that I had to escape, but there was no way. I didn't have my phone. I had left it on the table, out of reach. The clock was still missing, and the door was a smooth slab. I realized that even the windows were covered by thick blinds. I couldn't see outside. He leaned forward. "Do you want to know why I do this?" I shook my head. I didn't want to know anything, but he spoke anyway. "I've worked with patients for 20 years. Most of them don't want to be cured, they just want to alleviate the symptoms." His voice was deep and slow. I discovered that real suffering is not resolved by talking, but by facing control. Deep down, everyone wants to be guided. What destroys people is freedom. He looked at me with an almost scientific fascination. "So, I designed a therapeutic environment where the outside world ceases to exist, where only the essentials remain, you, and the voice that heals you." He got up and walked over to a built-in cupboard. He opened it with a key he wore around his neck and took out a metal tray with food, bread, water, some fruit. "You'll eat here. You don't need to go out yet." My throat was dry. "How long do you plan to keep me here?" He smiled without answering. "When you start talking without fear, you'll know the answer." I hardly slept the first night. He left me a mat on the floor next to the armchair. Before turning off the lights, he said to me, "Sleep is the body's way of accepting confinement. If you resist, you won't sleep. If you surrender, you will rest." I didn't close my eyes for a second. I listened to every sound, every step he took outside the room. Sometimes he stood in front of the door, as if keeping watch. Other times he muttered something I couldn't hear. The darkness was total. At some point I must have fallen asleep because I woke up with a start. There was a faint light, the dawn filtering through the edges of the blind. On the table was a handwritten note. "Breakfast on the tray. The session begins when you're ready." It wasn't signed, but the handwriting was neat and firm. Over the next few days, or what I assumed were days, the pattern repeated itself. He would enter silently, always impeccably dressed, his hair combed the same way. He would sit across from me, write things down in his notebook, and ask increasingly invasive questions. not just about my life or my traumas, but about my routines, my friends, my sexual relationships, my physical fears. If I tried not to answer, he would smile with disappointment. Silence is also an answer, he would say, but not one that will set you free. When I dared to raise my voice, to demand that he let me out, his tone became lower, more measured. You don't understand yet. Outside, no one listens. Outside, they only lie to you. Here, on the other hand, everything is real. I tried to attack him once when he left the door ajar. I lunged at him, pushing him with all my strength. He wasn't expecting it, but he was quick. He grabbed my arm and twisted my wrist with an ease that took my breath away. His face remained expressionless. Aggression is fear, he whispered close to my ear. Don't be afraid of me. He let go of me, and I fell to the floor. He didn't hit me, he didn't yell at me. He looked at me for a few seconds and said, "Now we start again." After that, time became blurred. I no longer knew if days or weeks had passed. The lights turned on and off at intervals I couldn't control. The food was always the same. Bread, water, fruit. Never more, never less. He talked for hours, sometimes about philosophy, sometimes about me. He mixed psychological theories with phrases that seemed to come straight out of a cult manual. Confinement is not punishment, he repeated. It is a mirror. Only when the world is reduced to a single room can you see who you really are. I cried silently. But sometimes, when the despair was unbearable, his words made sense. I found myself nodding or repeating his phrases to myself, just to feel that someone understood something I didn't. One day he asked me to call him by his name. "I'm not your therapist," he said. "I'm your guide. Call me by my name." I couldn't. He leaned in, bending down until he was inches from my face. "If you can't say it, say you. Respect is the first form of freedom." The paradox was so absurd that I laughed, but my laughter sounded broken, like inverted crying. He stepped back with a slight smile. "You're already starting to heal." That night, while he was out, I desperately searched for a way to open the door. I checked the edges, the hinges, the desk drawers. In one of them, I found something unexpected. A small camera, the size of a coin, hidden among papers. The red light was flashing. It was watching me the whole time. I felt the urge to destroy it, but I stopped myself. If I did, he would know I had found it. So I put it back where it was. I sat down on the couch, trembling. The idea of him watching me eat, sleep, cry made me sick. But there was something worse. The idea of letting him watch me on purpose, that it was all part of the therapy. I began to notice subtle changes in the environment. The air smelled different, denser. The temperature rose or fell without warning. Sometimes the lamp would flicker, and he would say it was part of the adaptation process. One night, while he was talking, I realized that he had been wearing the same clothes since the first day. Exactly the same. Blue shirt, dark pants, the same non-existent watch. It wasn't possible. No one could maintain that appearance for so long without variation. But every time I tried to think about the outside, fear cut off my thoughts. I couldn't remember the exact date or how long it had been since I'd arrived. The isolation was beginning to work. And the worst part was when I started to feel that his voice calmed me. It was a relief to hear him talk, even though I hated him. One afternoon, if it was afternoon, he asked me for something new. "I want you to take my chair." I looked at him, not understanding. "Why?" "Today you will lead the session. You will ask me questions. I will answer." I thought it was a psychological game, but I obeyed. I sat in his chair. From there, the perspective was different. He was in front of me, relaxed, with his hands on his knees. "Ask me a question," he said. I took a while to answer. "Why are you doing this?" He smiled. "Because someone has to. Me. Everyone." His gaze didn't waver for a second. "But you're ready." I didn't know what to say. I just looked at him, waiting for a crack in his control. But there were no cracks. There was something hypnotic about his serenity. an absolute authority that emptied my mind of thought. That was the first time I thought I might never leave. Not because I couldn't escape, but because he wouldn't let me remember how to do it. I don't know how much time passed after that session. It could have been days or months. The concept of week no longer made sense. The light turned on and off at irregular times. The food always appeared fresh, but I never saw him bring it. Sometimes I heard noises on the other side of the door, footsteps, the creaking of a metal tray, but never the sound of a lock. It was as if things materialized while I slept. The scariest thing was realizing that I was starting to talk to him even when he wasn't there. Sometimes, without realizing it, I would say aloud the phrases he used to say. Control your breathing. Don't think about leaving. Outside is noise. I said them in his tone, almost imitating his cadence. Part of me did it to survive. Another part did it because I was beginning to believe that there really was something healing about that calm. One day, when he came back, he brought a notebook. He handed it to me. I want you to start writing about your progress. He looked at me with a kind of tenderness that turned my stomach. Your fears, your thoughts, everything. What if I don't want to? I said. Then you'll write about that. About not wanting to. So I did. I began to fill pages, at first with insults, scribbles, fragments of memories I feared I would forget. Then, without realizing it, the tone changed. I began to record my emotions with surgical precision, as if the act of writing separated me from the pain. I read things I had written down myself and didn't remember thinking. Phrases like, maybe he was right. There's no one outside to listen. Everything is silent here, and that is peace. The words began to become a trap. He read them every morning without comment. Sometimes he simply nodded, like a teacher satisfied with his student's progress. Until one day he interrupted me in the middle of the session. You're not writing for yourself, he said coldly. You're writing for me. What do you mean? You're still acting. You want to please me, even when you try to hate me. You force me to do it. No. His voice was a thread of steel. I don't force anyone. I only show the inevitable. It was the first time he had ever hit me. Not with excessive force, but with precision. A sharp, calculated slap without anger. My skin burned, and I was paralyzed. He watched me silently for a few seconds and said, "Now feel. Don't analyze, don't justify. Just feel." Then he left, leaving me alone, trembling. I cried until I lost my voice, but at some point the crying turned into something more like relief. I felt that, for the first time in weeks, something inside me had broken. And breaking hurt, but it also brought a kind of clarity. Maybe that was what he wanted. Maybe, in his sick logic, that was the cure. That night, I dreamed about the door. I dreamed that it had a handle. But when I turned it, there was no exit behind it, just another room that was exactly the same. And inside it, I was sitting writing in a notebook. I watched myself and smiled, as if it had all been planned. I woke up sweating, and for the first time, I didn't know if I was still dreaming. The next morning, he came in with a metal box. He placed it on the table between us. "Today we're going to talk about the fear of time," he said. "What's inside?" "You'll see." He opened the box. Inside was a small hourglass with a wooden base. He turned it over, and the sand began to fall. "Each session will last as long as it takes for this to empty," he said, pointing to the hourglass. "There will be no more hours or minutes, only this." The sound of the grains falling was unbearable. It hypnotized me. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. When it finally emptied, he turned it over again. "See," he whispered, "time doesn't end. It just repeats itself." That idea haunted me for days. The clock, the repetition, time that doesn't move forward, only circles around itself. I began to think that there was no before or after, only that prolonged present that he controlled at will. And when the mind loses time, it loses everything. One day he woke me up with a different phrase. Today, we'll change places. I thought he was talking about the chair, but no. He took me gently by the arm and led me to a side door I had never seen open before. It was a small room with a full-length mirror, a metal bed, and in the center, a white robe folded neatly. "You'll stay here tonight," he said. "Put on the gown." "Why?" "Because now you are the patient," he smiled. "And I am the observer." The observer. That word stuck with me. I spent hours looking at myself in the mirror, wearing the gown, my hair messy, my eyes sunken. I looked like a mutilated version of myself. At some point, I began to talk to my reflection, imitating his voice, saying the phrases he used to use. Fear is control. Freedom is pain. Silence heals more than words. The outside does not exist. And the worst part was that, as I said them, I felt relief. A strange, sick, but real peace. For a moment, I understood his logic. When he came back, he found me like that, sitting on the floor, wearing the robe, repeating his words. He approached slowly, with a mixture of pride and tenderness. "You see," he whispered, "the treatment works." I don't remember responding. I only remember that it was the first time I didn't feel afraid. Not even when he turned off the light and locked the door, leaving me alone. I don't know if I slept that night. Maybe I did. Maybe I just passed out from exhaustion. When I opened my eyes, the room smelled different, like metal and disinfectant. In the dim light, the hourglass was on the table, motionless, with half the grains suspended in the air. They weren't falling. It was impossible. I touched it. The sand wasn't moving. The sensation was so unreal that I had trouble telling if I was dreaming. He appeared shortly after. He entered without saying a word, his hair messy and dark circles under his eyes. He was carrying something in his hand. An old tape recorder, the kind therapists use to record sessions. He put it on the table and pressed the red button. "Today you will be the one leading the session," he said. "What does that mean?" "That now you ask the questions, I will answer." I looked at him confused. "Why?" "Because you are already cured." He smiled weakly, and his voice broke for the first time. "And I'm sick." For a few seconds, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Was this another one of his tests? A game? But his gaze was empty. Lost. "I want you to understand," he continued, "that the cure was always symmetry. Two minds facing each other, reflecting each other until the differences are erased." "I don't understand." "Of course you understand." He took a step toward me, and I smelled sweat and anxiety. "Look at me. Look at me closely. Don't you see that we're the same now?" I stood still. His face was close, too close. In his eyes there was a plea, something childish, almost human. "I opened you," he whispered. "Now it's my turn." Then he took my hands and brought them to his neck. I felt his warm skin, his rapid pulse. "Do it," he said. "End the session." "No." "Do it. Set me free." I pulled away, my heart pounding in my chest. He laughed, a broken, hollow laugh. "You're not ready yet," he said. Then he left, closing the door with a soft click. 3 days passed without him returning. 3 days in which I heard noises in the hallway, erratic footsteps, murmurs, a sharp knock, something falling. I didn't know if he was alive or dead, if he was still watching me, or if he had simply abandoned me. The silence became unbearable. So I started talking. At first I talked to the mirror, as usual, then to the tape recorder, pressing the red button. "Session 1, I said. "The patient has disappeared. The doctor continues treatment." My voice sounded calm, professional. "Objective, to understand the root of control." I paused for long periods like him. Hypothesis. Control is not domination, but reflection. The patient needed a mirror, not an escape. Each word brought me a little closer to his way of thinking. I began to write his phrases on the walls with a black marker. Only in confinement is there truth. The therapist and the patient are the same body. The door does not exist. The door. That thought obsessed me for days. I approached it, touched it. Cold, smooth, no handle. But underneath, in the frame, I noticed something I had never seen before. A small slot, like a latch. I slipped my fingers in. It was an internal mechanism. With a little force, it moved. The door opened. The first gust of air hurt my face. The hallway was narrow with cement walls and cables hanging from the ceiling. I walked barefoot, feeling the rough floor beneath my feet. I turned a corner and saw him. He was there, sitting on the floor, his back against the wall. There was dried blood on his neck, and he was holding a syringe in his hand. His eyes were open, staring into space. The recorder was next to him, the red light on. I bent down and stopped it. I played the last recording. His voice sounded weak, barely a whisper. Final session. The subject shows signs of release. She no longer needs guidance. The cycle is complete. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, looking at him. For a moment, I thought about running, about getting out, about getting help. But my legs wouldn't move. Instead, I covered him with a blanket. One I found thrown over a chair. Then I went back into the room. I sat down in his chair. The robe was still on the back of the chair. I put it on. I turned on the recorder. Session 1, I said in a calm voice. New patient. Extreme fear of losing control. Possible trauma resulting from prolonged isolation. There was no one in front of me, but I kept talking. The sound of my own voice filled the room, warm, familiar, and for the first time since I entered that place, I felt peace. Not freedom, not relief. Peace. Weeks later, when the police raided the building after an anonymous tip, they found two things: a decomposing body in the hallway and a young woman sitting at a table wearing an immaculate white gown and with a tape recorder turned on. She looked at them calmly and said, "Please don't interrupt. The session has just begun." The sound of the door opening startled me, although, in reality, nothing surprised me anymore. I settled into the chair, the white gown fitting perfectly over my shoulders, my hands folded in my lap. The tape recorder was still on, its red light flashing faintly. Every time someone entered, I assessed them. I knew that was my role now, to assess, to control, to guide. The police officers entered cautiously, their boots echoing on the cold floor. Their guns hung from their hips, their faces tense. One of them was the first to speak. "Is everything okay in here?" I nodded calmly. My voice sounded clear, without vibration, as if the absolute security of this space was mine and mine alone. "Everything's in order." I smiled slightly. "The session is in progress." There was no need to shout, to beg, to cry. Not anymore. Now I controlled the pace. My words filled the room, filling the men's ears with empty authority. I picked up the tape recorder and pressed play. My voice rang out, that of my former captor, mixed with my own. "The cure requires symmetry. The door does not exist. The therapist and the patient are the same body." One of the policemen approached cautiously, examining the papers and markers on the walls. I tried to explain what had happened, but even my words sounded empty, because they were no longer entirely mine. I was sharing his language, the cadence of his thoughts, and I felt a sick satisfaction in that. As they walked around the room, inspecting the place, my mind replayed every detail of the previous weeks. How I had grown accustomed to the routine, how the initial fear had turned into willing obedience, and finally, into a kind of silent pride. My sessions were now autonomous. I no longer needed him to push me to think, to feel, to accept confinement as a method of healing. One of the policemen touched the chair where he had been sitting, his lifeless body lying behind the door. I felt a strange kind of emptiness, as if a piece of something that had been mine for days was missing. I took a marker and wrote a few lines on the edge of the table, carefully. Patient stabilized. The mind reflects confinement. The cycle continues. No one understood. No one could understand. I looked into their eyes, shining with confusion and horror, and smiled slightly. It wasn't cruel, it was simply logical. Everything had followed a pattern from the very beginning, and I had reached the inevitable conclusion. The only way to survive was to become the final version of the person who had locked me up. As the police cautiously withdrew, murmuring among themselves about protocols and evaluations, I rose from my chair. I walked to the window, watching the gray sky above the city that knew nothing of what had happened in that silent building. Outside, cars drove by. People walked, passers-by, unaware that a small empire of terror and control had existed there, and that now I occupied it entirely. My reflection in the glass was strange, unfamiliar. The white coat seemed to hug my body protectively. My breathing was slow, steady, as if I had learned a new rhythm of life. There was no panic, no urgency, only the certainty that everything was over and, at the same time, beginning again. I picked up the tape recorder and placed it on the table. The red light flashed softly. I knew that the next person to enter would hear my voice and perhaps understand the lesson I had learned, that the human mind is malleable, and that confinement, if accepted, can be a refuge, a power. I turned off the light and sat back down in the chair. Outside, the city continued, oblivious, and I was alone but completely whole. The session never ended. Now I was the one who dictated the rules, who set the limits, who observed and controlled. There was no escape, no panic, no fear. There was only silence and awareness. The world could come in or not. I was ready. And no one ever could take away this space that now belonged to me completely.